Chapter 3196. The first elder was stunned for a moment, and then his expression became very interesting. He said subconsciously, "Sect Master, what kind of situation is this? Aren't you angry at all? He invaded our mountain gate and killed thousands of our disciples, guards, and servants. How can you still be in the mood to praise him?" The first elder couldn't understand Yi Wuji's calmness, and his tone was a little impatient. He even seemed to be blaming Yi Wuji for what he had done. Yi Wuji glanced at him expressionlessly and said in a cold voice, "I'm just telling the truth and lamenting. What's wrong with that? Also, the vice sect master killed himself in public to protect the sect's foundation and disciples. Although this was heroic and worthy of praise, it was also his duty. I'll give him a posthumous title at my discretion. As for the 6,000 disciples, guards, and servants, it doesn't matter if they're killed. We can recruit more in the future. The main elite force of our sect is here. We'll rise again soon." The first elder was speechless. He didn't know how to refute. In fact, he also knew that the 10,000 people who stayed in the sect weren't important to the Hetian sect. As long as the main elite force was still there, even if the 10,000 people were killed and the mountain gate was destroyed, the Hetian sect could still rise again. At this time, Yi Wuji added in a calm tone, "Also, our mountain gate is still there, and there are still more than 10,000 people alive. Although the loss this time is heavy, it's not enough to hurt our sect." Hearing this, the first elder was obviously stunned. He asked subconsciously, "Sect Master, how do you know the mountain gate is still there? I haven't reported this yet." Yi Wuji stared at the giant bronze gate attentively and said without turning his head, "Actually, you've already reported it. If the mountain gate was destroyed and everyone was killed, you would be even angrier than now. Moreover, the moment you open your mouth, you will say that Tianxing destroyed Thousand Sun Island, killed everyone, and destroyed the foundation of our sect. But you only said that he broke into Thousand Sun Island, broke the sect's protective formation, and killed more than 6,000 people." After hearing his explanation, the first elder finally understood. He couldn't help but nod and say, "Sect Master is indeed very meticulous. I admire you." Yi Wuji ignored his flattery and continued, "What's more, I had expected this result and guessed that Tianxing wouldn't kill all of us. After all, he was a monstrous genius whose name had spread throughout the various divine kingdoms. It was only natural that he cherished his reputation. The vice sect leader had already committed suicide in front of everyone, so how could he kill the old, the weak, the sick, and the disabled? Furthermore, Tianxing only had a deep hatred for Wang Lin. He did not have any blood feud with our sect. His goal is everlasting union. He won't exterminate our sect. Leave some leeway for everything so that we can meet again in the future. If he really destroyed Thousand Sun Island and killed everyone, our sect would not rest until he was dead. He didn't have to do that." After hearing Yi Wuji's analysis, the first elder felt relieved and understood many things. He pondered in silence for a moment before nodding and saying, "No wonder Sect Master knew that Tianxing would kill Thousand Sun Island, but didn't send anyone back to help. So, you've already expected this result, and everything is under your control." Yi Wuji continued, "The reason why Tianxing did this was to show off his power and warn me not to meddle in other people's business. After he left Thousand Sun Lake, he should have gone to search for Wang Lin's whereabouts. Only a few people know that Wang Lin is secretly heading to the Cloud Sea secret realm. However, Tianxing's methods are unpredictable. Perhaps he has also received this news. I have reason to believe that Tianxing might have chased Wang Lin all the way to the Cloud Sea secret realm." The first elder's expression changed, revealing a gloomy and vicious expression. He grinned hideously and said, "That bastard dares to come here. Let's cut him into pieces and avenge our disciples." Yi Wuji nodded slightly and said, 50 top forces are gathered here. If Tianxing doesn't know the truth and chases Wang Lin all the way here, then he is courting death. All right, keep an eye on Wang Lin's movements and be ready to help him at any time. I need to continue studying the formation of the gate of the Divine Palace. If there's nothing important, don't disturb me." The first elder got the answer he wanted, and his anger dissipated a little. He said yes and turned to leave. 5 days passed quickly. That evening, two important things happened at the same time. First, Prince Lien had been hiding and advancing secretly all the way until he finally arrived at the Cloud Sea secret realm. When he met up with the elite forces of the He Tian sect, his half-month-long escape ended. Seeing the many elites of the He Tian sect and the dozens of top forces in the Cloud Sea, Prince Lien heaved a sigh of relief. In his opinion, the Cloud Sea secret realm was now the safest place in the Great Yan Empire. Not to mention that Tianxing didn't know his whereabouts. Even if he chased him all the way here, he wouldn't be afraid. The second thing. Tianxing successfully arrived at the Great Yan city at sunset. Under the dim yellow sunset, the majestic imperial city with a radius of 800 miles stood among the vast mountains. There were continuous mountain ranges all around, and huge peaks that were 30,000 feet tall could be seen everywhere. The pure white clouds formed a sea of clouds halfway up the mountain. It was a magnificent sight. The Great Yan Empire's capital was among the mountains. There were 18 huge peaks around it, and above them was a vast sea of clouds. The divine power of heaven and earth gathered here, and it was the most precious land within 100 million miles. It was different from the other imperial cities that Tianxing had seen. The imperial city of the Great Yan Empire was actually circular. The surrounding city walls were 1,000 feet tall and 100 feet thick. The walls were built with huge stones, and the surface was mottled with traces of vicissitudes. There was a tall city gate in each of the 4 cardinal directions, and a large number of city guards guarded it day and night. One had to check their identity tokens and pay a certain amount of divine stones to enter the imperial city. In addition, the 4 city gates would be closed late at night, and no one would be allowed to enter or leave. Tianxing had already prepared a large number of identity tokens in his spatial ring. Some were from the Bloodfire Divine Nation, some were from the Raging Flame Divine Nation, and all kinds of identities. Lin Shui and the others stayed in the Divine Battleship while Tianxing took the Divine Battleship and walked down the city gate alone. Originally, he could change his appearance and disguise himself as a member of the divine race and sneak into the imperial city. However, he didn't choose to do that. He maintained his original appearance and calmly walked through the city gate. Stop! Without a doubt, 2 city guards in black armor stopped him with halberds. Show us your identity token. The 2 city guards sized up Tianxing with scrutinizing and vigilant eyes. After all, 99% of the people who entered the imperial city were members of the divine race. Tianxing, a member of the divine race, was very conspicuous. He raised his hand with an indifferent expression. With a flip of his palm, he took out a dark red identity token. This was the identity token of the Raging Flame Divine Nation, and his identity was that of a sect master. The 2 city guards repeatedly checked the identity token, sized up Tianxing, and secretly discussed a few words through voice transmission. Suddenly, their expressions changed. One of the city guards suddenly shouted coldly, "Men, capture him!" Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 3197. The sudden shout caused a commotion at the city gate. Hundreds of Protoss who were entering and leaving the city were originally lined up in an orderly manner. Suddenly, a large number of city guards pulled out their swords and surrounded Tianxing with murderous intent. Everyone hurriedly dodged and cried out in alarm. However, it was human nature to watch a show. Many Protoss who were entering and leaving the city retreated to the edge of the city gate and poked their heads out to look at the encirclement to see what was happening. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of city guards surrounded Tianxing and pointed their swords at him. The leader of the silver-armored captains walked in front of him with a dignified expression and sized him up with sharp eyes. While observing him, the silver-armored captain took out a jade slip and used his consciousness to check the portrait in the jade slip and compare it with Tianxing. After 3 short breaths, the silver-armored captain confirmed the answer and put away the jade slip. He stared coldly at Tianxing and grinned coldly. "God of slaughter, Tianxing, how dare you come to the imperial capital? You're courting death." Tianxing glanced at him and said indifferently, "Although I don't care to bicker with ants, you'd better be polite. If you speak rudely again, don't blame me for being ruthless." The silver-armored captain was obviously stunned when he heard this. When he reacted, he laughed out of anger and scolded contemptuously, "Ha! Did I hear wrong? You dare to threaten me in the imperial capital? You lowly alien, don't think you're so great just because you have some strength. I'm telling you, no matter how capable you are, you'll have to surrender and accept the punishment of the Empire's law when you come to the imperial capital. Don't put on airs in front of me. I've seen high-ranking officials, dignitaries, and experts, and compared to you." The silver-armored captain was the captain of the city guards. He seemed to be a small official, but he guarded the city gate and held great power. He had always been arrogant and domineering. Moreover, the experts of the 18 divine nations who came to Great Yan's imperial capital were weaker and more tolerant. Under such circumstances, the silver-armored captain did not take Ji Tianxing seriously. Even when he heard that God of Slaughter Tianxing had attacked Thousand Sun Lake and killed thousands of heavenly sect disciples, he did not take it to heart. After all, no matter how powerful an expert was, he had to tuck his tail between his legs when he came to the imperial capital. This was a principle that had never changed. However, the silver-armored captain did not know that he had kicked an iron plate this time. Before he finished speaking, Ji Tianxing frowned and released his invisible divine might to suppress him. The silver-armored captain's voice came to an abrupt halt. His face instantly turned deathly pale, and his knees gave way as he knelt on the ground. Thud! A muffled sound reverberated under the city imperial capital's gate. The silver-armored captain knelt in front of Ji Tianxing's feet and buried his head in his chest, looking like he was admitting his mistake. Of the city guards of the imperial capital, even the surrounding god race clansmen were dumbfounded as they looked on in disbelief. No one would have thought that the foreign race's white-robed youth would be so arrogant and domineering. He dared to threaten the captain of the city guards. Moreover, the white-robed youth did not even raise his hand and made the silver-armored captain kneel. How shocking was that? Instantly, a series of discussions and exclamations erupted from the crowd. The silver-armored captain was sweating profusely. He was terrified and humiliated. He was so angry that he trembled. He wanted to shout loudly for the surrounding city guards to charge forward and capture Ji Tianxing. However, under Ji Tianxing's divine might, he could not make a sound at all. Even moving his fingers was difficult. Fortunately, the hundreds of city guards came to their senses and roared angrily. "Bastard! What did you do to our captain? You are indeed a despicable foreign race. How dare you sneak attack our captain? This bastard openly attacked the city guards and committed a crime of rebellion. Everyone attack together and kill him." As they roared, the hundreds of city guards attacked at the same time. They waved their swords and sabers and charged toward Ji Tianxing. Although these city guards only had the strength of a heavenly god. However, they had the advantage in numbers. When they attacked at the same time, it was also mighty and powerful. It looked like Ji Tianxing was about to be drowned in the sword light and saber shadows and be blasted into pieces on the spot. The surrounding god clan members all screamed in horror and retreated in a panic, afraid that they would be affected. However, the outcome that everyone expected did not happen. A strange scene appeared. No one knew what kind of ultimate skill Ji Tianxing used. The surrounding space distorted and fluctuated, forming a pitch-black vortex. The sword light and saber shadows and divine skill attacks that filled the sky were all swallowed by the pitch-black vortex and disappeared completely. He was not injured at all and easily neutralized everyone's attacks. At the same time, he released an invisible divine might all over his body. It erupted like raging waves and spread in all directions. Boom! With a muffled explosion, the invisible divine might sent hundreds of city guards flying. Everyone vomited blood and flew out backward. They rolled 1,000 feet away and fell to the ground dizzily. A series of muffled thuds came out, mixed with the people's screams and cries of pain. Many city guards were knocked unconscious on the spot. They lay on the ground and did not move at all. A small number of city guards were seriously injured, lying on the ground and wailing, directly losing the ability to fight. Seeing this scene, the silver-armored captain was dumbfounded on the spot, revealing a horrified expression. The surrounding God clan members had long been scared out of their wits and fled in all directions. While fleeing in all directions in a panic, those God clan members still called for help in a panic, shouting things like, "Someone is rebelling," "A villain is barging into the city gate," and so on. For a moment, it was a mess under the city gate. There was a clamor of voices. Ji Tianxing could not be bothered. He casually knocked the silver-armored captain unconscious and stepped into the city gate. After entering the imperial capital, he walked along the straight main road and walked toward the center of the city. His expression was calm and composed. His pace was neither fast nor slow. It was as though nothing had happened and he was just taking a leisurely stroll in the courtyard. However, what happened under the city gate had long been passed down through the layers and was known by many city guards. Even the imperial guards in the imperial palace had heard the news. However, Ji Tianxing was not worried at all. This was exactly what he wanted. Before coming to Great Yan's imperial capital, Lin Shui had asked him how he planned to sneak into the imperial capital. At that time, Ji Tianxing revealed a playful smile and said, "Why do you want to sneak in? My goal in the imperial capital is the imperial palace and Great Yan's emperor. If I sneak into the city, won't I have to find a way to sneak into the imperial palace? That's too troublesome. I'll enter the imperial capital openly and look for Great Yan's emperor directly." Lin Shui was stunned. She said with a stunned expression, "Are you crazy? Won't you become the target of public criticism and have an open confrontation with Great Yan's emperor?" Ji Tianxing shook his head and said with a faint smile, "If I sneak into the imperial capital, Great Yan's emperor will be on tenterhooks and go all out to deal with me. If I enter openly, he'll let his guard down and sit down with me to negotiate. You don't understand the logic behind this." Chapter 3198. Humph. Why don't you tell me, why don't I understand? Lin Shui was naturally unconvinced, her tone somewhat depressed. Ji Tianxing did not explain to her, just said with a light smile, "You slowly figure it out yourself." Lin Shui was even more depressed, but it was not good to ask him the reason, lest she be laughed at by him. She fell into silence, secretly pondering the reason. Ji Tianxing walked along the avenue filled with fire parasol trees on both sides, walking toward the square in the middle of the imperial city. The speed of the news spreading was far faster than him walking. Along the way, the divine race citizens on the avenue all avoided him in time when they saw him, scattering in all directions. Countless people knew that a great battle took place under the city gates. A white-robed black-haired foreign race youth instantly killed hundreds of city guards and swaggered into the imperial city. Although everyone believed that that audacious fellow would be taken down by the imperial guards very soon, the imperial guards had not arrived yet. However, before the imperial guards arrived, no one dared to get too close to Ji Tianxing. If they were to suffer a calamity and be casually insta-killed by Ji Tianxing, then their deaths would be too unjust. However, many of the divine race citizens retreated to the two sides of the avenue, hiding under the big trees and inside the houses and palaces. Seeing Ji Tianxing walk with a calm expression without any signs of starting a massacre, everyone heaved a sigh of relief as if relieved of a heavy burden. They hid in the shadows and observed Ji Tianxing, whispering to each other and discussing. Who is that fellow? Why did he trespass into the imperial city? Even a 3-year-old child knows that attacking the city guards and forcefully barging into the city gates is an unpardonable capital offense. Is that fellow tired of living? Looking at his appearance and bearing, his strength is also very powerful. He doesn't look like a lunatic? Could it be that fellow is relying on his valiant strength and wants to openly challenge the imperial family's dignity? Since ancient times, people or forces that dare to go against the imperial family, no matter how powerful, have mostly been annihilated. He's alone and dares to challenge the imperial family? Isn't that a mayfly trying to shake a tree, a mantis trying to stop a chariot? Quickly look. Everyone quickly look. The city guards and imperial guards are all here. Suddenly, someone in the crowd let out a cry of joy. Immediately, countless people looked toward the center of the city. He only saw a dazzling 5-colored divine light in the sky, flying over at lightning speed. Inside the huge five-colored divine light, there were hundreds of elite warriors in dark red armor, carrying swords and halberds. There was a total of 400 experts in red armor. Their strength was at least at the 8th level of the heavenly god realm. Moreover, they were well trained. With such eye-catching attire, unique appearance, and aura, they were none other than the Imperial Guards of Great Yan's imperial family. On the other side, in the southeast direction of the imperial city, there was also a dazzling five-colored divine light that was rushing over as fast as lightning. That ball of divine light was like a cloud. Within it, there were thousands of figures. All of them were experts in black armor and wielding sabers and swords. These black-armored warriors were all 6th-level heavenly god realm and above. The powerhouses in the team, there were 10 1st and 2nd-level divine lord realm captains, and even a 5th-level divine lord realm commander. Upon seeing this scene, the god race citizens on both sides of the road exclaimed in surprise, revealing expressions of excitement and anticipation. Wow! The Imperial Guards and City Guards moved out together. Looks like the situation is dire. There are so many City Guards and Imperial Guards here. That brat is dead meat. From the moment that brat barged into the city gates, he's already a dead man. Say, do you think the City Guards or the Imperial Guards will make a move later? Although the Imperial Guards are under His Majesty's command and have a higher status, that brat is the brat's face. He's slapping the City Guards in the face. I'm sure the City Guards will want to save face and make a move first, right? We're in for a good show now. I wonder how long that brat can last under the siege of the City Guards? I bet 10 breaths of time. I think 3 breaths of time is enough. I bet they won't fight. That brat will surrender before the City Guards make a move. There were thousands of God race citizens gathered on both sides of the road. They discussed among themselves as though they were gloating and waiting to watch a good show. The atmosphere was rather cheerful. Soon after, the Imperial Guards arrived first. Swoosh! The rainbow divine light flew in front of Ji Tianxing and stopped in the sky, blocking his way. 4 Imperial Guards captains in dark red armor and purple capes stood at the front of the team. They stared coldly at Ji Tianxing. The 400 Imperial Guards held their halberds tightly and arranged themselves in a defensive formation in the sky. They looked at Ji Tianxing cautiously. An invisible murderous aura spread across the sky. Everyone could see that this group of Imperial Guards had a solemn expression. Their eyes were grave, as if they were facing a great enemy. The surrounding God race citizens vaguely felt that something was wrong and started to discuss secretly. What's going on? Aren't the Imperial Guards usually very arrogant and high above the masses? Why do I feel that the Imperial Guards are very nervous? They look very guilty and can't beat that brat. The Imperial Guards who have always been arrogant actually have timid moments? Where did that brat come from? Let's not care about that first. Looking at the aggressive manner of the City Guards, they should be making a move first. Just as expected, thousands of City Guards also arrived. They spread out and surrounded Ji Tianxing from the side. The commander and the 10 captains all took out their divine weapons and stared at Ji Tianxing with murderous intent. They shouted, "How dare you? Surrender now! How dare you barge into the city gate? This is an unforgivable crime. Arrogant brat, if you surrender now, you can die with dignity." The thousands of City Guards were also emotional and hot-blooded. They were ready to pounce on Ji Tianxing at any time and tear him into pieces. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows, and the corners of his mouth curled into a mocking sneer. He looked at the commander and asked, "Don't you know who I am? You rushed here in a hurry just to avenge the trash guarding the city gate?" Hearing this, the City Guard commander and the 10 captains were all stunned, revealing a puzzled expression. Indeed, they had only heard that someone had barged into the city gate and quickly gathered the troops to come to support. They had no time to ask about the specific situation and did not know who had barged into the city gate. Now that they heard Ji Tianxing's words and saw the abnormal reaction of the Imperial Guards, they realized that something was wrong. The white-robed brat in front of them seemed to have a strong background and was not to be trifled with. Just as the city guard commander was hesitating and wanted to ask for more details, an Imperial Guard captain spoke up. Commander Li, this person barged into the city gate and injured nearly 100 city guards. By right, he should be handed over to the city guards to be dealt with. However, His Majesty personally ordered us to deal with this matter. So, you can go back now. We will deal with this matter. Suddenly hearing this news, the thousands of city guards were stunned and looked incredulous. The thousands of God Clan people on both sides of the road also looked as if they had seen a ghost and exclaimed. Chapter 3199. Oh my God! How could this be? We were right. That white-robed boy has a powerful background. The city guards are not qualified to deal with him? The Imperial Guards have to deal with him? Oh my God! His Majesty the Emperor gave the order personally? Who is that boy? How could he be worthy of the Emperor's attention? The show is getting more exciting. Let's see how the Imperial Guards deal with him. The thousands of Deity Clan citizens who were watching were discussing excitedly. The commander and the 10 captains of the city guards heaved a sigh of relief. They were grateful to the captains of the Imperial Guards. After all, Ji Tianxing was not someone to be trifled with. He must be very powerful. If the city guards were to fight him, they might suffer heavy casualties and cause more chaos in the imperial city. However, with so many commoners watching them, they couldn't be cowards. Otherwise, they would be humiliated and ridiculed. They would become a joke. Now, the captains of the Imperial Guards stopped them at the right time and gave them a way out. The commander of the city guards quickly came back to his senses and bowed to the 4 captains of the Imperial Guards to express his gratitude. Then, he said in a loud and serious voice, "It is the duty of the city guards to guard the 4 gates of the imperial city and protect the citizens. This man broke through the gates and we cannot forgive him. We should arrest him and punish him. However, His Majesty the Emperor has ordered the Imperial Guards to deal with this matter. Naturally, I have to retreat and obey His Majesty the Emperor's order." After that, he led the city guards to retreat 100 steps and made a "please" gesture to the captains of the Imperial Guards. "My lords, please." The city guards stood at the side and watched from the sidelines. Everyone's attention was focused on the Imperial Guards. The 2 captains of the Imperial Guards walked toward Ji Tianxing. Their expressions were indifferent and their eyes were cold. Countless citizens were wondering if the 2 captains of the Imperial Guards were going to fight. Unexpectedly, the 2 captains of the Imperial Guards stopped 10 steps in front of Ji Tianxing. They cupped their fists and bowed to him. "Greetings, young Master Tianxing." The 2 of them spoke in unison. His Majesty had long guessed that young Master would definitely make a trip to the imperial city. However, young Master's intentions are unclear. "Please come with us." Clearly, the 2 captains of the Imperial Guards had received orders from the Great Yan Emperor and were prepared. As soon as they heard that there was a big battle at the city gate and hundreds of city guards were injured, they guessed that it was Ji Tianxing's doing and hurried over to stop him. After all, apart from him, the god of slaughter, no one in the Imperial Empire dared to act so recklessly. The reason he had come to invite Ji Tianxing was to calm him down and prevent him from going on a killing spree and bringing disaster to the imperial city. Ji Tianxing naturally understood the Imperial Guard's intentions. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "Since you are here on the Emperor's orders, where are you taking me?" The 2 captains cupped their hands and replied, "Of course we're inviting you to the palace. His Majesty the Emperor wants to see you." Ji Tianxing nodded in satisfaction and said, "All right, lead the way." After saying that, he flew toward the palace under the escort of the Imperial Guards. The group quickly disappeared into the horizon, leaving behind 1,000 city guards and a few thousand onlookers. They were discussing with complicated expressions on their faces. "That's unbelievable. That brat injured the city guards, but nothing happened to him? Is he going to let it go just like that? I can't believe it. His Majesty the Emperor wants to see him personally. Who is he? I heard the captains of the Imperial Guards call him young Master Tianxing. Why haven't I heard of this name before? Which top faction is he from? Young Master Tianxing? Why does this name sound so familiar? I think I've heard of it before. There's a rumor about a god of slaughter who went south and went on a killing spree in the blood flame and raging flame divine nations. I think his name is Tianxing? What? He's that god of slaughter Tianxing? It should be him. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so daring and wouldn't be summoned by his majesty. Heavens! The god of slaughter is cruel and bloodthirsty. He's extremely dangerous. Why is he in the imperial city? This is too scary. Why didn't His Majesty the Emperor order to get rid of such a bloodthirsty demon? Why did he summon him personally? What's wrong with this world? Why can't I understand? Following the frenzied discussion, Ji Tianxing's identity was soon revealed. Not only were the commoners surprised, but they were also filled with worry and fear. Even the captains of the city guards and the thousands of city guards were secretly shocked. They felt fear and relief. They had all heard of the legend of the god of slaughter and knew of Ji Tianxing's deeds. In fact, they had received the emperor's order a few days ago to strictly guard the 4 city gates to prevent the god of slaughter from attacking. They didn't expect the god of slaughter to come. Luckily, they didn't act rashly. Otherwise, they would have been slaughtered. Moreover, if they were all killed, the matter would be blown out of proportion and the entire imperial city would be alarmed. By then, not only would their sacrifice not be rewarded, but they would also be charged with a crime. It was scary just thinking about it. The 4 captains of the Imperial Guards guarded Ji Tianxing on his left and right while the 400 city guards followed behind. A moment later, they arrived at the Imperial Palace's gates. Although the walls of the Imperial Palace were not as tall as the city walls, they were sturdier and thicker. The red walls and glazed tiles made the place look grand and majestic. Outside the huge palace gates, 100 city guards were lined up in a row. Ji Tianxing and the others passed through the palace gates. They walked along the straight and wide path and entered the luxurious and vast Imperial Palace. The Imperial Palace was huge. It had a radius of 50 miles. There were more than 50,000 people in it. Naturally, there were more than 40,000 maids, servants, and imperial guards. Inside the Imperial Palace, there were splendid palaces and elegant courtyards everywhere. There were also more than a dozen shining golden pagodas. They passed through many palaces and courtyards. After making many turns, they finally arrived at the core of the Imperial Palace. When they arrived outside a splendid palace, the 400 Imperial Guards stopped in their tracks. They lined up in a formation in the plaza outside the palace and waited quietly. The 3 captains of the Imperial Guards guarded Ji Tianxing. One of them entered the palace to report to the emperor. Ji Tianxing looked at the decorations of the palace. He knew this was not the imperial court. This must be the place where the emperor of Great Yen dealt with government affairs, rested and cultivated. Just as he had expected. The captain of the Imperial Guards came out soon after he entered the palace. He walked up to Ji Tianxing, bowed, and said, "Young Master Tianxing, please come with me. His Majesty is waiting for you in the Great Hall." Then he led Ji Tianxing up the stairs and into the Great Hall. The light in the spacious Great Hall was dim. Even during the day, the gemstone lamps were still lit. The captain of the Imperial Guards walked into the Great Hall. He did not dare to look at the emperor as he said respectfully, "Your Majesty, young Master Tianxing is here." After he finished speaking, he bowed and left the Great Hall. The Great Hall fell silent. Ji Tianxing looked around. A deep and dignified male voice rang in the air. "It's just as I expected. You audacious fellow, you still came." Chapter 3200. The man's voice was deep and steady. It was awe-inspiring. If it were an ordinary person, they would have been intimidated by the soul-calming voice and kowtowed immediately. However, Ji Tianxing did not react. He remained standing in the Great Hall with an indifferent expression. He raised his head and looked at the seat of honor, his gaze landing on the wide golden throne. He saw a young man dressed in dark red sitting on the throne. He wore a 5-clawed golden dragon robe and a crown with 9 dragons on his head. He was tall and burly, and his eyes were deep and sharp. He exuded a powerful and domineering aura. This was the current emperor of Great Yen, Yen Yongning. In the dark corner behind him, there was a faint wisp of black mist. It was impossible to see what it was. But Ji Tianxing was able to tell with one look that that wisp of faintly discernible black fog was actually a 9th-stage realm god monarch expert. He must be Yan Yongning's loyal old servant. Or perhaps he's a capable subordinate? He thought to himself, but his expression did not change. He said to Yan Yongning, as expected of Great Yan's emperor, "Your mind is so clear that it's admirable." Yan Yongning raised an eyebrow and said with a faint smile, "Ha! If I don't even have a brain, how can I sit on the throne and control such a huge empire? Tianxing, I've been very kind to you. Are you not even willing to address me as your majesty? Or are you saying that you don't want to be a subject of the Great Yan Empire?" On the surface, it sounded like Yan Yongning was blaming Ji Tianxing for being arrogant and not knowing how to respect his superiors. However, there was a deeper meaning to his words. He was testing Ji Tianxing to see if Ji Tianxing would submit to him. Was Ji Tianxing disloyal to him? Ji Tianxing smiled and said indifferently, "We both know whether you're being kind or fearful of me. Why do you have to point it out? Moreover, I'm from another race. I'm not a subject of the Great Yan Empire." Yan Yongning frowned when he saw how decisive Ji Tianxing's reply was without the slightest hesitation. However, he didn't flare up. Instead, he said expressionlessly, "Tianxing, although you do have some strength, you are indeed impressive. However, you have to know that this is the Great Yan Empire. There are many crouching tigers and hidden dragons. The empire's tens of thousands of years of history is not something you can imagine. It's normal for young people to be arrogant because of their talents, but overconfidence is arrogance, and you'll suffer a great loss." Ji Tianxing smiled again and said indifferently, "You said this because you haven't seen through me completely. What does the strength of the Great Yan Empire have to do with me?" Before this, Yan Yongning had been pondering and considering. Ji Tianxing would definitely come to the imperial city. If he snuck into the imperial city, he would definitely have other motives. He would most likely cause a huge commotion, so they had to guard against him strictly. But he swaggered into the imperial city, which was equivalent to announcing to everyone, "I have no other intentions. My goal is very clear." Don't worry. Now that Yan Yongning heard these two sentences again, his brows relaxed, and his heart calmed down a lot. Ji Tianxing's meaning was clear. The strength of the Great Yan Empire had nothing to do with me. Anyway, I'm not going to make the Great Yan Empire an enemy. Since that was the case, Yan Yongning's heart calmed down a lot. He asked again, "I asked the imperial envoy to tell you clearly that the Great Yan Empire doesn't welcome you. Why did you come? Did you think that Prince Lien would return to the imperial city to seek protection after escaping to the Great Yan Empire? So, you came to the imperial city this time to kill him?" When he asked this question, the corners of his mouth curled up in a faint smile. Obviously, he was waiting for Ji Tianxing to nod and give a definite answer. In that case, he could tell the truth and make Ji Tianxing's hopes dashed. Deep in his heart, he really wanted to see Ji Tianxing's disappointed expression after his miscalculation. After all, he was also a confident and arrogant young genius. He couldn't stand Ji Tianxing's arrogance. To his surprise, Ji Tianxing shook his head and said with a playful smile, "You and I both know that Prince Lien is not in the imperial city. Why do you have to ask? I believe you know better than me where Prince Lien is really hiding." Yan Yongning frowned and asked doubtfully, "Since you're not here to kill him, what are you doing in the imperial city? As far as I know, this is your first time in the Great Yan Empire. You have no relatives or friends here. You don't belong to any faction behind you. Therefore, you have no reason to come to the imperial city." Before Ji Tianxing came, Yan Yongning had asked Black Flame to investigate and gather information. He had analyzed and analyzed many times, but he still couldn't figure out why Ji Tianxing came to the imperial city other than to kill Prince Lien. Ji Tianxing's smile became even more playful. He said, "The 18 neighboring kingdoms have all submitted to the Great Yan Empire. In the north of the Tianbei region, the Great Yan Empire is the overlord. Moreover, the Great Yan Empire has been passed down for more than 30,000 years. It has a very deep foundation." Yan Yongning puffed out his chest and felt a little proud when he heard this. However, Ji Tianxing changed the topic and made a request that made him speechless. Therefore, the great Yan Empire should know the history of the past tens of thousands of years. Moreover, the great Yan Empire had the largest collection of history books. I came to the imperial city this time to ask for your help. I want to investigate a very important matter and check the great Yan Empire's book collection. After hearing this, Yan Yongning's eyes widened as he stared at Ji Tianxing in astonishment. He was stunned for a moment before he recovered and asked in disbelief, "You risked being attacked and killed to come to the imperial city just for this matter?" Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and asked, "Why? Is there a problem? Or is this very difficult for you? You're not willing to help?" No. Yan Yongning hurriedly waved his hands and said, "What's so difficult about this? I just can't believe that you're doing this for such a small matter. Isn't this too much of a fuss? Any imperial official above the 6th rank can enter the imperial palace's book collection and read the books at will. They just need to register." Ji Tianxing waved his hands and explained, "You're mistaken. I'm not talking about the kind of book collection that is open to the public and can be accessed by anyone. I'm talking about the book collection that contains classified information. What I want to investigate is top secret. Previously, I didn't find any relevant clues in the Bloody Flame and Raging Flame divine nations. This time, it was Yan Yongning's turn to wave his hands and refuse without hesitation. Don't even think about it. The book collection in the book collection is all top secret. How can I let you read it? Not to mention you, even if I want to enter the book collection, the pavilion elders will have to register, interrogate, and supervise the whole process." Ji Tianxing was not surprised by this answer at all, and he was prepared for it. He stared at Yan Yongning and said with a faint smile, "What if I insist on entering?" Yan Yongning's face fell immediately. His expression became serious, and his eyes became more serious. "You're serious?" Sword piercing the 9 heavens, sword piercing the 9 heavens. Chapter 3201. Of course. Ji Tianxing nodded without hesitation. Yan Yongning narrowed his eyes and his gaze became sharp. He said in a low voice, "For this, you will pay a painful price, even death." Ji Tianxing spread his hands disapprovingly and said indifferently, "At most, I will be surrounded by countless experts and have a great battle. Then, the entire imperial city will be destroyed and I will more or less be injured." Without waiting for him to finish, Yan Yongning's face turned black, and he angrily slammed his hand on the table. Bang! A muffled sound exploded and reverberated in the hall. The table made of peerless divine jade was smashed into pieces and scattered on the ground. Arrogant. Simply arrogant to the extreme. Yan Yongning was so angry that he laughed. He pointed at Ji Tianxing and scolded, "Boy, your arrogance knows no bounds. I have many experts under my command. If I want to kill you, I only need to flick my finger to turn you into ashes. Is it because I cherish talent and am too kind to you that you are so presumptuous?" Ji Tianxing was still indifferent and said expressionlessly, "Back then, the Emperor of Blood Flame, the Emperor of Raging Flame and Prince Lien had the same reaction as you. However, you also saw the result. Today, I will leave my words here. You can think about it yourself. If you are confident enough, why don't you try and see if the imperial city is destroyed first or if I am killed first? Anyway, you have hundreds of monarchs and thousands of imperial guards lying in ambush around this palace. As long as you give the order, they will pounce over and besiege me." Ji Tianxing was not only confident and arrogant, but he also pointed out Yan Yongning's thoughts. That's right. Before summoning Ji Tianxing, Yan Yongning had secretly set up an ambush. Hundreds of monarchs and thousands of elite imperial guards were lying in ambush around the palace, waiting for orders at any time. Yan Yongning was exposed, but he did not feel embarrassed and quickly calmed down. He took a few deep breaths and suppressed his anger. He stared at Ji Tianxing fiercely and remained silent for a long time. To be honest, he was not convinced and was very angry at Ji Tianxing's arrogance. However, he knew that Ji Tianxing was also a top monarch. Even if all the experts in the palace could kill Ji Tianxing in the end, the palace would be destroyed. However, The price they paid was that the entire palace was razed to the ground. Thousands of imperial guards, ministers, and members of the royal family were killed. The battle would even affect the entire imperial city and turn it into ruins, and millions of innocent people. At that time, even if he won the battle and killed Ji Tianxing, he would be disgraced. He would become the laughingstock of the world and the most humiliating emperor of the great Yan Empire. Most importantly, the exploration of the Green Jade Palace had reached a critical juncture. The gates of the Divine Palace could open at any time. At that time, the 50 forces would compete for the right to enter the Divine Palace. The imperial family would definitely be able to enter the palace. However, after the battle with Ji Tianxing, he had lost a lot of his experts. He would not be able to take the lead in the process of exploring the palace. At that thought, Yan Yongning could only force himself to calm down and carefully consider this matter. After thinking for a long time, he could not help but sigh silently in his heart. Sigh. Forget it. I have no enmity with this guy. Why should I fight with him and waste my forces? At that time, Grand Prince Lien will secretly laugh at my misfortune. Even if I can kill this guy, I will have to pay a heavy price and bring shame to the empire. Yan Yongning knew very well that he, the newly appointed emperor, had not yet secured the throne. There were many people with ulterior motives who were always looking for opportunities to remove him from the throne. At such a time, he could not make a big mistake. He had to be careful. Therefore, Yan Yongning made up his mind and said to Ji Tianxing seriously, "Kid, you are very smart, but also very arrogant. You are very lucky. I am in a good mood and have been promoting conciliation and benevolence in recent decades. Therefore, I can forgive your recklessness and help you make a request to the cabinet elders. As for whether the cabinet elders agree to let you in to read the information, it has nothing to do with me." Ji Tianxing immediately nodded and said with a smile, "I am very pleased that you can weigh the pros and cons and make this decision. I thank you." Although it was a thank you, Yan Yongning felt awkward and frowned. "Kid, what do you mean?" Ji Tianxing did not evade and said straightforwardly, "You and I both know that even if you use all the power of the empire to kill me, you will have to pay a heavy price. The great Yan Empire has been powerful for too long, and it is sacred and invincible in the eyes of the people. If I destroy the imperial city and kill millions of people, it will be a great humiliation. You will also bring shame to the imperial family. You have just ascended the throne a few decades ago and still need to use benevolence to win people's hearts and stabilize the situation. If there is chaos, the image that you have painstakingly built will collapse overnight. The people in the empire will also take advantage of the situation and create rumors. Besides, you and I both want to get rid of Prince Lien. There is no need to fight to the death and let Prince Lien sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. Most importantly, there is a big matter in the northwest that you are most concerned about and looking forward to. You can't let me affect your plan." When Yan Yongning heard this, his eyes narrowed into slits and flashed with a cold light. His whole body tensed up and he forgot to breathe. He was shocked and angry. At that moment, he really wanted to strangle Ji Tianxing and ask, "How the F***ck do you know so clearly? And the big matter in the northwest, are you referring to the Azure Jade Palace? Despicable bastard, how do you know about the existence of the Azure Jade Palace? Which bastard dared to leak the news?" Yan Yongning roared in his heart, his killing intent boiling. However, he suppressed his anger and killing intent and kept himself calm. Ha! After a long time, Yan Yongning suddenly sneered and then laughed loudly. The ancients said that those who live to the end are not necessarily strong, but they are definitely wise. We finally understand why you were able to live until now despite causing so many disasters. Boy, you are good. You are good. Yan Yongning stared at Ji Tianxing, gave him a thumbs up, gritted his teeth and praised him. Ji Tianxing knew that from this moment on, he and Yan Yongning were enemies. Although Yan Yongning wouldn't do anything to him in the imperial city. But after he leaves the imperial city, it would be hard to say. He didn't care and said with an indifferent expression, "In that case, this matter is settled. You can go and tell the elders." Yan Yongning frowned and said in a cold voice, My favor is not so easy to return. I can help you, but you must promise that no matter what method you use, you cannot let Prince Lin come back alive. Also, this is a secret that must not be known by others. Otherwise, I will not let you go even if I use all the power of the empire to chase you to the ends of the earth. Chapter 3202. Yan Yongning agreed to help, but he made a request. Moreover, these words were very sensitive and should not be heard by others. Yan Yongning wanted to get rid of Grand Prince Lin to prevent future trouble. However, he could not do it himself, nor could he let the imperial family do it, lest it affect his reputation. Therefore, he could only rely on external forces. Ji Tianxing was the best candidate. Ji Tianxing agreed to Yan Yongning's request without hesitation. No problem. Even if you didn't ask, I was going to do it. Yan Yongning was very satisfied with Ji Tianxing's answer. He nodded slightly and said, "Very good. It's easy to deal with smart people. I'll go tell the elders now. You can wait here." "Go ahead." Ji Tianxing spread out his hands and waited patiently in the hall. Yan Yongning left the hall and rushed to the library to meet the elders. Naturally, the Black Flame Governor, who had transformed into a wisp of black mist, followed behind Yan Yongning. Previously in the hall, the Black Flame Governor had been invisible and restrained himself from saying a word. Now that he had left the hall, the Black Flame Governor could no longer hold back the doubts in his heart and said, "Your Majesty, although I understand your concerns, you are too indulgent of that kid." Yan Yongning's face darkened as he said in a low voice, "Now the investigation of the Green Jade Palace has reached the most critical moment, and there can be no mistakes. Although I am confident that I can kill this kid, I will have to pay a heavy price. The gains do not make up for the losses. Only a wise man can know when to yield and when to stand tall and when to advance and when to retreat." The Black Flame Governor was silent for a moment before he continued, "Even so, you should not have agreed to help him enter the library. Even if you refuse him directly, he will not make a scene in the palace and will leave sensibly." Yan Yongning shook his head and said in a firm tone, "No, you are wrong. He is very sure that there is a library in the palace that collects ancient history books. If I refuse him, he will definitely sneak in by hook or by crook. I can see that this kid is very arrogant and conceited. He does things regardless of the consequences, as if he doesn't know what fear is." After pausing for a moment, he continued, "Furthermore, I only promised to help him ask the pavilion elders. I can't guarantee that he will be able to enter the library pavilion." The Black Flame Governor said with a complicated tone, "But you're the ruler of the empire after all. Once you've given the order, you have to get it done. Otherwise, it will damage the imperial prestige." Yan Yongning laughed self-deprecatingly and said, "Right now, my throne is not stable yet, and I have not completely controlled the entire divine kingdom. Those damned rebels are still looking for opportunities to overthrow me. What vast and mighty imperial might! That was all for outsiders to see. I'm already very sullen as an emperor, so why would I care about prestige?" Since the conversation had reached this point, the Black Flame Governor had nothing else to say. He just sighed. "Your Majesty has always been wise and decisive. I hope that you will be right as always and that things will go smoothly." "Definitely," Yan Yongning murmured in a firm tone. Soon, the two of them arrived at the depths of the imperial palace, outside an inconspicuous black palace. This ancient, modeled, and inconspicuous palace was far less magnificent and dazzling than the other palaces. It looked like an abandoned palace that had been in disrepair for a long time, exuding an ancient and vicissitude aura. Yan Yongning walked to the palace gate and said with a solemn expression, "I request to see the 4 pavilion elders." As his dignified voice fell, several figures suddenly appeared outside the originally empty palace gate. They were several elite Imperial Guard powerhouses, and they quickly knelt on one knee and saluted Yan Yongning. Then, the Imperial Guard powerhouses opened the gate, and Yan Yongning stepped in and disappeared into the darkness. The Black Flame Governor, who had transformed into a wisp of black mist, stayed outside the palace gate and waited patiently. Ji Tianxing waited for a full 15 minutes in the hall where Yan Yongning lived. Finally, Yan Yongning returned with the Black Flame Governor. Ji Tianxing quickly looked at Yan Yongning and asked, "How's the situation? Did the pavilion elders agree?" Yan Yongning's expression was somewhat complicated. After hesitating for a moment, he explained, "Tianxing, I have already told the pavilion elders about this. They did not agree, but they did not refuse either. However, you have to follow me to the book collection pavilion. The 4 pavilion elders want to see you, and they might give you some tests." "The 4 pavilion elders want to test me?" Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows, and a playful smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Don't tell me it's another boring challenge and martial arts competition?" Yan Yongning frowned and said with some displeasure, "If you are afraid, you don't have to go. I have to remind you that the 4 pavilion elders are all top Sir gods who are close to 20,000 years old, and they are very powerful. They have lived in the book collection pavilion for a long time and can be said to be well-read. They know about the past and the present, and they are very knowledgeable. However, their temperaments are a little strange." Yan Yongning told Ji Tianxing the situation, hoping that he would back off. That would make things easier. However, how could Ji Tianxing be scared? He just smiled and said in an indifferent tone, "Let's not waste any more time. Take this monarch there now." Yan Yongning frowned again, but did not say anything. He brought him out of the hall and rushed to the book collection pavilion. Not long after, the 2 of them arrived outside the ancient Black Palace. Yan Yongning walked to the palace door and said in a deep voice, "Pavilion elders, I have brought Tianxing here." As his voice fell, the thick and sturdy palace doors slowly opened to both sides. Creak, creak, creak. The door opened a gap, which was only 2 feet wide, just enough for one person to pass through. Yan Yongning looked at Ji Tianxing and said expressionlessly, "You can go in. I still have things to deal with, so I will not wait for you." Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and said with a playful smile, "What? You don't want to know the result?" Yan Yongning said expressionlessly, "Even if the result is out, it will not be done in a short time. Besides, someone will naturally report the result to me." In fact, he already had the answer in his heart and didn't want to wait for the result. In his opinion, the 4 pavilion elders were deliberately making things difficult for Ji Tianxing. Even if Ji Tianxing had great ability, it was impossible for him to pass the test. Failure was inevitable. Since that was the case, why should he waste his time? Ji Tianxing could roughly guess what he was thinking. He just smiled and didn't say anything else. He stepped into the dark hall and his figure disappeared in the darkness. Bam! The palace door slammed and made a muffled sound. Yan Yongning said expressionlessly, "Stay here and report to me as soon as you have the result." After saying this, he turned around and left. The Black Flame Governor complied and turned into a wisp of black mist, staying in place. Chapter 3203. The hall was as dark as ink, cold and deathly still. Ji Tianxing slowly walked toward the center of the hall. At the same time, he released his divine perception to check his surroundings. He had thought that the hall would be filled with bookshelves or that there would be hidden compartments on the walls to store history books. But in reality, the hall was empty. There were no bookshelves or books. There were only 8 pillars that were as thick as a water tank. There was a statue of a god in each of the 4 corners. There was a 100 feet tall altar in the center of the hall. It was made of blood red and black stones and looked a little strange. Ji Tianxing walked towards the altar and carefully observed it without blinking. At this moment, a sinister voice suddenly rang out in the darkness. "Kikik, I've been guarding this place for 10,000 years, and this is the first time I've encountered an outsider. How interesting." Ji Tianxing stopped and turned his head to look behind him. He saw an old woman in a black robe and a black iron mask standing 10 steps away from him. This old woman from the Great Yen Divine clan had a hunched back. Her fiery red hair was disheveled, and she held a flaming walking stick in her hand. The mask covered her face, and her true appearance could not be seen. However, the eyes under the black iron mask shone with a cold light. She looked as if she was up to no good. Ji Tianxing sized her up expressionlessly to check her cultivation base. Just as Yan Yongning had said, this old woman before him was very powerful. Not only was she a 9th-level divine lord, but her divine power aura was also unfathomable. Her foundation was very deep. Ji Tianxing thought that this black-robed old woman's strength should be among the top 10 in the Great Yan Empire. "Old woman, how are you going to test me?" The black-robed old woman did not speak. However, a low and hoarse old man's voice rang out in the darkness. "You're lucky to be able to enter the library, foreign kid. Why are you so impatient instead of cherishing this short period of time?" As the voice fell, an old man in a purple robe with disheveled hair and a dirty face appeared behind the black-robed old woman. He was also an old man from the Great Yan divine tribe. His body was shriveled, and his face was old and decrepit. His purple robe was wrinkled, and his purple hair was messy. He looked no different from a beggar. However, such a sloppy old man, who looked like he had one foot in the grave, possessed a terrifying amount of divine power. His strength realm was the same as the black-robed old woman, both being 9th-level divine lord realm. However, his strength and foundation were superior to the black-robed old woman's. The two cabinet elders stood side by side and stared coldly at Ji Tianxing, giving off an extremely oppressive aura. However, Ji Tianxing's expression remained calm, as if he was not affected at all. His tone was calm as he said, "I heard from Yan Yongning that there are 4 pavilion elders. Why don't you all show yourselves? Don't come out one by one. Everyone has to say a few words. What a waste of time." Suddenly hearing these 2 sentences, the black-robed old woman and the purple-robed old man's expressions changed, and their eyes became fierce and ghastly. "What an arrogant brat. You've really opened my eyes. You dare to be impudent in the library? You're courting death." At the same time as she shouted angrily, the black-robed old woman suddenly brandished her flaming walking stick, sweeping over towards Ji Tianxing. "Brat, you don't have the qualifications to enter the library. Get out." In an instant, the flaming walking stick released a vast and surging divine fire, sweeping over towards Ji Tianxing. The entire great hall was illuminated by the fiery light. The temperature also became extremely horrifying. It looked like Ji Tianxing was about to be drowned by the blazing divine fire. But he did not panic in the face of danger. Raising both hands unhurriedly, he kneaded a divine art and stabbed towards the black-robed old woman. Bush, bush, bush. In an instant, several dozen streaks of dazzling sword light shot out, carrying a power that could pierce through everything, striking the blazing fire with a loud bang. Bang, bang, bang. A series of muffled bangs erupted, reverberating in the empty great hall. The blazing divine fire that the black-robed old woman fired out was actually sliced into pieces by the sword light, collapsing and dissipating. Not just that, those several dozen streaks of sword light were perfectly preserved, still having 60% of their power remaining. They all stabbed towards the black-robed old woman. Instantly, the black-robed old woman was enveloped by the sword light that filled the sky, falling into a dangerous situation. Seeing this scene, the black-robed old woman's gaze turned cold, and she grinned coldly. "Pa, little bastard, you actually have some ability." As she spoke, she brandished her flaming walking stick with all her strength, instantly slashing out several dozen times, smashing all the sword light into pieces. She quickly resolved the crisis, then swiftly retreated, waving the walking stick in her right hand, striking out with a divine art with her left palm, releasing a powerful divine ability to launch an attack. At the same time, the purple-robed old man had already pressed forward, attacking Ji Tianxing with both his fists and feet. On the surface, his offensive moves looked simple and clumsy, and could not be said to be exquisite or pleasing to the eye. But Ji Tianxing could see that the purple-robed old man's offensive moves were simple and unadorned, and had already reached the realm of the great Tao being the simplest. The seemingly ordinary punches and kicks were actually the most perfect and invulnerable moves. Not only were they the most powerful and the most economical, but they also contained the power of several dozen divine Tao laws. Clearly, this purple-robed old man was not simple. Just in time. Ji Tianxing was not afraid, and with a low shout, he also raised both his fists to attack the purple-robed old man. He did not use any divine ability, and only used his lifetime of combat experience combined with simple and unadorned fist techniques to clash head-on with the purple-robed old man. Bang! In the next instant, the two people's fists collided, exploding with a loud, dull sound. Incomparably violent power burst forth from the two people's fists, spreading out in all directions. Instantly, the space around the two people violently fluctuated, and cracks appeared. The result was also unexpected. Ji Tianxing was shaken back 10 steps, and his figure swayed for a while before he stabilized, his face slightly pale. As for the purple-robed old man, he was actually shaken back, and he rolled and smashed 1,000 feet away. While he was still in midair, he had already opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood. No one expected this. The purple-robed old man and Ji Tianxing clashed head-on, and he was actually defeated. He could not even take one move, and he was injured by Ji Tianxing. The purple-robed old man was not the only one who was shocked and in disbelief. The black-robed old woman also looked as if she had seen a ghost, her eyes wide open. How is this possible? While the black-robed old woman was in a daze, Ji Tianxing did not stay idle. His figure flashed, and he teleported in front of the black-robed old woman, lifting his right leg and sweeping it out. Bright golden light shone, and it was as if a divine sword was slashing down, and it was unstoppable. The black-robed old woman came back to her senses, and subconsciously held her walking stick in front of her to block. Clang! Ji Tianxing's leg swept the flaming walking stick, and the collision of the two caused a metallic sound that reverberated violently in the main hall. Although the flaming walking stick was a supreme monarch-grade divine artifact, it was not damaged. But the incomparably violent impact sent the black-robed old woman flying 1,000 feet away, and she fell into the darkness. When she staggered to her feet, her body was even more bent, and she was panting violently. Blood also flowed out from under the black iron mask. Chapter 3204. Before this, the two pavilion elders did not think much of Ji Tianxing. Even though Yan Yongning had told them that Ji Tianxing was powerful and difficult to deal with, they did not think much of it. However, the two pavilion elders did not think much of it. In their opinion, even if a young foreign tribesman had some talent and strength, how powerful could he be? In terms of bloodline and talent, he was definitely not as good as the noble great Yan divines. In terms of age, cultivation time, accumulation of divine power, and foundation, he might not be very powerful. When the two pavilion elders tested Ji Tianxing, they were toying with him like a cat playing with a mouse. After all, they were bored in the library. It was good to have some fun to relieve their boredom. However, they did not expect the results to be so shocking. Both of them had only exchanged 2 moves, and they were already injured by Ji Tianxing. This was an unbelievable miracle. It was too surreal. This should not have happened. However, this was the truth. No matter how much they refused to believe it, they could only accept it and find a way to deal with it. Boy, I've underestimated you before. That's why you had a chance. However, I'm going to use my full strength now. You're going to get lost soon. The black-robed old woman said sinisterly. She channeled all her energy and began to use her ultimate killing move. The purple-robed old man raised his sleeve to wipe the blood off his face. He was not angry or humiliated. Instead, he was excited and thrilled. He stared at Ji Tianxing with a scorching gaze and grinned hideously. Ha! I've forgotten how many years it's been since I was last injured. You brat, you actually brought me such a pleasant surprise. How wonderful! After being bored in the dark for so many years, I finally have some fun. As he grinned hideously, the purple-robed old man also channeled all his energy. His body burned with towering divine flames. His body expanded rapidly and transformed into a flame giant that was 1,000 feet tall. The flame giant's body was dark gold as if it was made of gold. Its bald head was shiny, and its limbs were huge. Its muscles were bulging and contained a destructive power. Infinite exploding fist. The golden giant roared and turned into a ball of dazzling golden light as it charged toward Ji Tianxing. 360 punches were thrown in an instant. You want to lose even more thoroughly? This monarch will fulfill your wish. Ji Tianxing did not budge an inch. His fighting spirit was also aroused. He sneered, and with a flash of black light in his right hand, he summoned the sword of burial of heaven and charged at the golden giant. Swish! Swish! He formed a sword with his left hand and used the sky-piercing finger to attack the golden giant. Brandishing the sword of burial of heaven with his right hand, he slashed out hundreds of sword lights, forming a sword net that enveloped the golden giant. Bang! Bang bang bang! The heaven-piercing finger collided with the golden fist radiance, resulting in an earth-shattering explosion. Then, the sword radiance and fist radiance that filled the sky collided fiercely, causing a series of loud noises. The two figures collided in the darkness. In an instant, they clashed hundreds of times before quickly separating. The golden giant was sent flying tens of thousands of feet away and fell into the darkness. As for Ji Tianxing, he quickly stabilized himself after retreating 1,000 feet away. Such an outcome caused him to frown and reveal a playful expression. So it's an alternate space. From the moment I entered the hall, I stepped into a space that they set up in advance. Clearly, the spacious hall around him was not real. It seemed that the dark hall was only 1,000 feet in radius. However, after retreating 1,000 feet, his body passed through the wall of the hall, and he was still in the darkness. The golden giant was sent flying tens of thousands of feet away, and his body was still in the darkness. The surrounding walls and pillars were all illusory. They did not suffer any damage and were still there. Ji Tianxing understood that he had to break through this layer of space or leave this space to return to the first floor of the library. Just as he was thinking to himself, the black-robed old woman charged over. Divine Flame's sky-opening strike. The black-robed old woman's body surged with divine flames. She held the dark red divine flame walking stick with both hands and smashed it down fiercely like a spear. She used all her strength and continuously slashed out thousands of flaming giant blades in a breath's time. Countless hundred Zhonglong giant sabers intertwined with one another, forming a terrifying saber net that shrouded Ji Tianxing's figure. Ji Tianxing did not dodge at all. He formed a sword seal with his left hand and waved the sword of burial of heaven with his right hand. He used a sword Dao ultimate technique and attacked head-on. Swish! 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 Thousands of sword lights carried the power of laws of wind, fire, divine lightning, and other laws as they violently slashed at the flaming giant blades. With a series of loud booms, the flaming giant blades and sword lights that filled the sky collapsed. Billions of fragments of divine light shot out in all directions, stirring up a destructive storm in the darkness. In the end, the flaming giant blades were all shattered, but there were still hundreds of dazzling sword lights left. They ruthlessly slashed at the black-robed old woman. She hurriedly retreated and waved her walking stick to block the sword lights. Bam! 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 There was a series of muffled sounds, and the black-robed old woman was sent flying again. Ji Tianxing was about to give chase, but the golden giant suppressed his injuries and charged over again. This time, he seemed more excited and violent. He waved his fists and legs with all his strength, sending out fist lights and leg shadows that blotted out the sky. Every fist light and leg shadow contained a destructive power that could suppress everything. The power was very domineering and fierce. Ji Tianxing wanted to end the battle quickly, so he no longer hesitated. He also used the celestial dragon tyrant body and turned into a 300-meter tall golden armored god of war. He held the 80-meter-long sword of burial of heaven with both hands and slashed out 500 sword lights with all his strength to clash with the golden giant. Boom! 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 Kacha! Kacha! The sky full of sword lights collided with the fist lights and leg shadows, causing deafening explosions that reverberated in the darkness. The dazzling sword lights kept shattering, and so did the fist lights and leg shadows that filled the sky. The golden giant's attack was neutralized, and it was sent flying by a dozen sword lights. Ji Tianxing hurriedly gave chase and added 2 more sword strikes and a punch. The golden giant flew backward for dozens of miles before falling into the darkness. As soon as he got up from the darkness, he coughed violently, and purple blood spurted out of his mouth and nose. When he got up, his chest and abdomen were caved in, and there were a few horrifying wounds that were bleeding profusely. His injuries were even more severe. Fortunately, the black-robed old woman was entangled with Ji Tianxing again, so he didn't chase after him. Taking advantage of this gap, the golden giant hurriedly channeled his energy to suppress his injuries. After 2 breaths, the black-robed old woman was sent flying again, and her injuries were even more miserable. The golden giant regained his composure and rushed toward Ji Tianxing with a roar, launching a fierce attack. Just like that, the 2 cabinet elders joined forces to besiege Ji Tianxing, and they both gave it their all. Although they took turns to attack Ji Tianxing, they were still no match for him. However, none of them were a match for Ji Tianxing. As long as they fought him head-on, they would definitely be injured by him. As time passed, the 2 cabinet elders' injuries became more and more serious. Therefore, they could only change their strategy and no longer take the initiative to attack. Instead, they wandered in the darkness, avoiding Ji Tianxing's attacks and tangling with him. Even though this was a great humiliation to the 2 of them, they had no choice but to do this. They couldn't admit defeat, right? That would be even more humiliating. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 3205. It was supposed to be a test, but it turned into a fierce battle. The funniest thing was that the black-robed old woman and the purple-robed old man were no match for Ji Tianxing even after joining forces. On the surface, it seemed like the 2 elders were the ones being tested. Ji Tianxing, on the other hand, was in the dominant position and seemed to be at ease. The 2 sides fought for 15 minutes and exchanged thousands of blows before the battle finally ended. It didn't end because there was a winner. It was because Ji Tianxing had broken the alternate dimension and dispelled the boundless darkness. As early as the 2 sides had exchanged more than 10 moves, it was already clear who was superior and who was inferior. However, the 2 elders resisted desperately. No matter how badly they were injured, they gritted their teeth and held on. They even changed their strategy and didn't take the initiative to attack. Instead, they circled around and stalled for time. They were destined to lose, but at least it wouldn't be so humiliating if they could drag it out longer. Losing to Ji Tianxing within 10 breaths and losing to Ji Tianxing within 15 minutes were 2 completely different concepts. The former represented a huge gap between them and being defeated instantly. The latter meant that they were evenly matched and only lost after a long battle. Ji Tianxing also understood this point, so he wasn't in a hurry to defeat the 2 elders. While he was fighting with the 2 cabinet elders, he paid more attention to observing the alternate dimension and thinking about how to break it. After all, he didn't have any deep grudges with the 2 elders. There was no need to be so ruthless. He could give them a way out. Moreover, he was being tested by the 2 elders. He still had to read the information in the library later. It wouldn't be good if he really became enemies with the 2 elders. Reality proved that this move was very effective. Swoosh! White light flashed and the alternate dimension shattered. The boundless darkness quickly dissipated. Ji Tianxing and the 2 elders appeared in a clean and bright hall. The white jade floor was spotless. Thousands of gems were inlaid in the corners and ceiling, emitting a bright divine light. There were bookshelves all around. On top of them were many treasure boxes containing history books and classics. Each treasure box was very sturdy and protected by a divine array. Not only could it protect the books from moisture and dust, but it could also prevent them from aging due to the erosion of time. Rows and rows of bookshelves crisscrossed each other. Even the surrounding walls had many hidden compartments that stored all kinds of books. Ji Tianxing and the 2 cabinet elders appeared in the middle of the hall. The area around the 3 of them was empty, and the ground was engraved with a profound diagram of a divine array. Clearly, this was the formation to open the alternate dimension. Although he had just gone through a great battle, Ji Tianxing was still calm and composed as he calmly observed his surroundings. The 2 pavilion elders, on the other hand, were staggering. They were in a sorry state and were panting heavily. Their black and purple robes had become ragged, their long hair was even more disheveled, and their bodies were covered in blood. Their divine power, in particular, was fluctuating violently. Their strength was extremely weak. Huff. The skinny purple-robed old man didn't care about his image in the slightest as he slumped to the ground and gasped for breath. Not only was he not angry, but he also did not feel humiliated. He even laughed heartily. "Pa, it's been a long time since I fought with all my might like today. This feels so good." No one would have thought that this unprepossessing and shriveled old man was actually a battle maniac. In fact, before he guarded the library, he was once the great Yan Empire's vanguard marshal. He had a lifetime of brilliant military achievements and was famous for his fighting prowess. However, he was entrusted by the previous great Yan Emperor to guard the library. For the past few thousand years, he had always stayed in the dark and had never left the library. His sharpness and edges were gradually smoothed out. However, the passion in his heart for battle had never been extinguished. Today's battle had ignited his former lofty sentiments and hot-bloodedness. Even if he was defeated, even if he was seriously injured, he still felt satisfied and satisfied. On the other side, the black-robed old woman's body was even more bent. She leaned on her walking stick and coughed non-stop. Blood kept flowing out from under her crooked black iron mask. She circulated her energy to suppress her injuries as she pointed at Ji Tianxing. Her voice was hoarse and intermittent as she said, "Good lad. You're really ruthless. I've underestimated you. Although we fought with you for a few thousand moves before we were defeated. But after so many years, you're the first one to defeat us. You do have some ability." The black-robed old woman was impressed and shocked by Ji Tianxing. However, she was a senior who had been famous for too long. How could she admit defeat so easily? It was already very rare for her to admit that Ji Tianxing was extraordinary. Ji Tianxing was not arrogant. He cupped his fists at the two pavilion elders and said with a smile, "Pavilion elders, thank you for letting me win. Thank you for painstakingly setting up this test. Now I've passed your test, right?" The black-robed old woman snorted and said angrily, "Lad, don't take it for granted. Although you're very strong, we were once the top 10 seniors of the empire. It's just that we've been guarding this shabby library for the past few thousand years and neglected our cultivation and fighting. Otherwise, how could you have won?" Ji Tianxing just smiled and did not reply. The purple-robed old man panted twice and waved his hand at him, saying, "Lad, we're guarding the first floor of the library. You've passed our test. You can look through all the books on this floor. However, you can't take away any of the books here, even if it's a piece of paper. You can't damage it." Ji Tianxing cupped his fists at him and said, "Many thanks." Then, he walked to the nearest bookshelf and reached out to pick up a treasure box, taking out the ancient books and records inside. He did not use his hands to pick up the ancient books. He let all the books float in the air in front of him. Then he released his divine sense and quickly scanned these ancient books to read the contents inside. He had been searching for information and clues related to the God Realm's turmoil 1,000 years ago. However, he used his divine sense to scan hundreds of ancient books and did not find any relevant clues. The ancient books on this bookshelf recorded the history of 10,000 years ago. Hence, he finished reading the books on this bookshelf and walked to the second bookshelf. The hall fell into silence. Ji Tianxing focused on reading the ancient books and records. The two cabinet elders hid in the darkness and silently healed their injuries. Time passed silently. For hours, 10 hours, 16 hours. One day passed. Ji Tianxing read the books very quickly. In just one day, he had read about 80% of the books in the hall. One must know that there were hundreds of bookshelves in the hall and thousands of secret compartments in the walls. There were more than 50,000 books in this hall. All of them were precious ancient books and information. The number of words was as vast as the sea. Ji Tianxing was about to finish reading all the books in the hall, but he still did not find the answer. At this time, the purple-robed old man stabilized his injuries and quietly came behind him. He stopped to observe him for a moment and asked, "Lad, what book are you looking for?" Chapter 3206. Although Ji Tianxing was reading the ancient book attentively, he was still reading it. However, he knew that the purple-robed elder had walked out of the darkness and stopped behind him to watch. However, he felt that the purple-robed elder had no ill intentions, so he ignored him. Since the purple-robed elder asked, he answered truthfully, "I want to investigate some past events. I want to know what happened 1,000 years ago." 1,000 years ago? The purple-robed elder frowned, looking puzzled. Ji Tianxing nodded and explained, "To be precise, it should be more than 1,040 years ago." 1,040 years ago? The purple-robed elder frowned even more. His expression changed slightly, and his eyes were somewhat evasive. Ji Tianxing sensed this and immediately asked, "Elder, you're a powerhouse who has lived for more than 20,000 years. You've personally experienced what happened back then. Moreover, you've stayed in the library for thousands of years. You must have read all the books here. You must know what happened 1,000 years ago, right?" The purple-robed elder laughed and pretended to be confused. "What are you talking about? Why can't I understand? In these few thousands of years, I've always been in the book collection pavilion and have never taken half a step out. How would I know of any unforeseen events and upheavals?" Seeing that he was deliberately hiding something, Ji Tianxing said directly, "Okay, then I'll explain more. 1,000 years ago, who was the great Yan Empire's master?" The purple-robed elder scratched his head and answered, "Of course it was the Tianbei Protectorate Lord." Ji Tianxing asked again, "What about the Tianbei Protectorate Lord? Who was his master?" The purple-robed elder said awkwardly, "My strength and vision are too low. How would I know this?" Ji Tianxing frowned and asked, "What about above the Tianbei Protectorate Lord? Was there an overlord in the boundless heaven continent at that time?" "I don't think so." The purple-robed elder could not lie through his teeth, so he could only answer truthfully. Ji Tianxing said with a serious expression, "But now, the boundless heaven continent is controlled by the Azura God Emperor. All the regions and empires on the continent respect him as their master. Do you know when the Azura God Emperor controlled the boundless heaven continent? How did he manage to gain control of the continent?" The purple-robed elder was in a dilemma. After pondering for a moment, he said, "All right, since you want to know about this matter, then this old man will tell you the truth. Actually, I'm not sure about this either. This should be the biggest secret, right? I only remember that 1,045 years ago, the great Yan Empire suddenly received a decree from the territorial lord. From now on, the Tianbei region will honor the Azura God Emperor. Furthermore, the Azura God Emperor was the common lord of the entire boundless heaven continent. Since then, the great Yan Empire had respected him as their lord. They had followed the territorial lord's instructions and built statues of him throughout the empire for the people to worship. As for who the Azura God Emperor is, where he came from, and how he conquered this continent, this old man has no idea. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and asked, "Is that all you know?" The purple-robed elder nodded and pointed to the top of his head. "You don't have to look at the remaining ancient books here. There's no answer in them that you want to know. You can go to the second floor of the library, where Elder Du is guarding. Perhaps you can find the answer there. Of course, the prerequisite is that you have to pass Elder Du's test." Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and put all the ancient books back on the bookshelf. He turned his head and looked at the stairs in the corner of the hall. The black stairs snaked up and connected to the second floor of the library. The purple-robed elder reminded him in a timely manner, "Elder Du probably won't fight with you. He's not much stronger than us. However, he's extremely knowledgeable. He knows everything about astronomy and geography. If you're not proficient in miscellaneous studies and don't know about ancient and modern history, it's better not to embarrass yourself." Ji Tianxing chuckled and said, "Thank you for the reminder. However, I've just finished reading the books on this floor and have a good understanding of ancient and modern history. I should be able to pass Elder Du's test." The purple-robed elder's expression was a bit strange. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "You want to pass the test after reading tens of thousands of books? Aren't you too confident? Goodbye." Ji Tianxing didn't want to explain more. He cupped his hands and flew to the stairs in the corner of the hall. The purple-robed elder watched him climb the stairs and disappear into the darkness. He couldn't help but shake his head. This kid has such terrifying strength at such a young age. He must be a cultivation maniac. Where would he have the time to learn about those anecdotes, astronomy, and geography? In his opinion, only people who were old enough and had too much free time could dabble in other fields of knowledge besides cultivation. Generally speaking, people who were powerful and knowledgeable were very old antiques. A young genius like Ji Tianxing shouldn't have the time to do anything other than cultivation. At the end of the stairs was a door of starlight the size of a millstone. The strange thing was that this door of starlight was round and silver-white. There were dozens of golden and purple light spots in the middle. The door of starlight kept spinning like a vortex. It seemed to have the effect of swallowing one's divine soul and consciousness. If one stared at the door of starlight for a while, they would feel dizzy and blurry. Ji Tianxing looked at it and raised his eyebrows. He murmured, "Meteorite starlight door? It's really something from thousands of years ago. Did Elder Du set it up?" As he thought, he stepped into the door of starlight. Swoosh! With a flash of starlight, his figure disappeared. The next moment, he entered a cold and dark space. It was dark and silent all around. In the distant darkness, there were dense silver light spots flashing. The numerous silver light spots gathered together to form a river of stars, hanging in the dark void. Directly above his head, there were several huge silver, white, and golden stars, like the sun and the moon. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianxing murmured with interest, "This is another alternate space set up by Elder Du? It can simulate the outer space? Interesting." As soon as he said that, the voice of an old man echoed in the void behind him. "Kid, I've been waiting for you for a long time." Ji Tianxing slowly turned around. His gaze fell on the stars 100 steps away. A white-robed elder of the great Yen divine tribe with a head full of white hair was standing tall and straight in the stars. The elder had a gentle appearance. 2 strands of silver-white hair hung down to his chest. He wore a pair of black cloth shoes on his feet, and he looked very sage-like. Ji Tianxing knew that this person was Elder Du, who guarded the second level of the library. Therefore, he cupped his fists politely and said, "Greetings, Elder Du." Elder Du nodded slightly and said, "Among the foreign races, there are very few people as talented as you. This old man has not seen anyone as talented as you for more than 6,000 years. This old man saw the battle between you and the 2 of them earlier. You're considerate of them to give them face and a way out." The library's reading website. Chapter 3207. Ji Tianxing did not find it strange at all that Elder Du was watching the battle in the dark. But Elder Du's attitude was so amiable, and she was not stingy with her praise, which surprised him. After all, as far as he knew, 99% of the divine race were arrogant and looked down on all the other races. Seeing that Ji Tianxing was silent and seemed to have something on his mind, Elder Du thought for a while and asked, "Are you surprised that my attitude towards you is different from others?" Ji Tianxing didn't try to hide it. He nodded and said, "It's indeed a little unexpected. However, I thought that it was because your breadth of mind and self-restraint is something that others can't compare to." Elder Du stroked his beard and looked at the vast starry sky with deep eyes. He said with some emotion, "You don't have to flatter me. I don't like it either. If not for this, I would not have given up the position of imperial preceptor and would rather hide in this library until I die alone." Ji Tianxing was startled and said with a chuckle, "I didn't expect there to be such a story. It seems that you are a sentimental person." Elder Du said with emotion again, "Many of the divine race think highly of themselves and look down on all the other races in the world as ants. But that is because their vision and vision are too narrow. If they look and explore the starry sky, they will understand that the most honorable thing in the world is not the creatures, but the stars in the sky. The starry sky is vast and boundless. There are as many stars as the gravel in the desert. Also, the stars are dazzling and have existed since time immemorial. That is the most powerful life in the world." "Life?" Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and asked with interest, "In your eyes, the stars in the sky are also life, isn't it?" Elder Du asked with a frown. "When I look at the starry sky for a long time, I see the stars twinkling as if they are blinking. Also, the stars in the sky can give birth to life and nurture all things. Most importantly, the stars can move on their own and travel in the void. If there is no life, how can they do this? Ji Tianxing smiled and said, Pavilion Elder's words are different. When we see stars twinkling in the sky, it's because the stars are too far away from us. The light emitted by the stars would be blocked by the dust and debris in the void, which was why it would flicker, as if it was blinking. As for the stars nurturing all things and giving birth to life, that was not absolute. Most of the stars were made of metal, rock, and soil. There were no signs of life on them. Only a very small number of stars that contained the power of the 5 elements, wind, thunder, rain, and lightning, could give birth to life. What creates life is not the stars, but the 5 elements and lightning. Speaking of this, he paused to observe Elder Du's reaction. Elder Du frowned and seemed to be deep in thought. She was not in a hurry to refute. He continued, Besides, the stars move on their own not because they are alive, but because of gravity. Ji Tianxing gave his opinion and did not say anything else. Elder Du thought for a long time before asking, So, you think the stars are lifeless? Ji Tianxing thought for a while and shook his head. It's not completely absolute. It depends on your understanding of life. Not all stars will exist forever. Many stars will grow and become bigger, but they will also shatter and become meteorites and dust. If the body of flesh and blood, the essence of plants, spirit, and thoughts are the standard, then the stars are lifeless. If we use life and death as the standard, then the stars are alive. Elder Du did not comment on his words. She only raised her eyebrows and asked, Young man, you have also studied the outer space and explored the mysteries of the stars? Ji Tianxing nodded and said, Of course. This is not because of a hobby, but a compulsory course on the path to the peak of the Shinto path. After all, the beginning of the Shinto path is to master power, to understand and change oneself. The second step of the Shinto path is to understand the heaven and earth and to integrate into this world. As for the third step of the Shinto path, it is to explore the outer space, to find more powerful and mysterious power, to pursue the eternity that may not exist. Elder Du's eyes opened slightly. Her eyes were bright as she murmured to herself, Pursue the eternity that may not exist? Interesting. This sentence is the lifelong wish of the Shinto path. That's right. When the majority of the Shinto path have enough power and control enough resources and wealth, they dream of shining with the sun and moon and existing forever like the stars. After that, she asked expectantly, Young man, are you like this old man? Do you dream of breaking through the Shinto path, breaking the space barrier and entering the outer space to explore the mysteries of the stars and pursue the eternal power? Ji Tianxing shook his head and said with a smile, That is not a dream, just a goal. Also, the outer space is not that mysterious to me. Elder Du's eyes brightened even more. She asked impatiently, Do you have a deep understanding of the outer space? Ji Tianxing nodded and said word by word, Not only that, because I have entered the outer space. Elder Du was stunned for a moment. Then she showed a face full of anger and scolded, Nonsense. Don't think that just because this old man praises you, you will get carried away and start talking nonsense. You are not a Shinto path at all. How could you have entered the outer space? Ji Tianxing waved his hand and explained, Elder Du, you are mistaken. I have not been to this outer space, but the outer space of the lower world. As he spoke, he pointed at the ground below his feet. Elder Du suddenly understood and asked, So, you have ascended from the lower world? Ji Tianxing nodded. Elder Du looked at him with a complicated expression and said in a strange tone, This is the secret you should keep the most. How can you tell this old man so easily? Do you know how to deal with the ascenders from the lower world according to the laws of the kingdom of God? Ji Tianxing said with a smile, What? Does Yan Yongning dare to take me to the mine and work hard for 500 years? Elder Du frowned and asked with a serious expression, You are so arrogant that you dare to despise the emperor. Are you not afraid of death? Ji Tianxing said with a smile, Who is not afraid of death? But in the great Yan Empire, I can't die, and no one can kill me. Of course, I am not afraid. You are indeed arrogant. Elder Du smacked his lips and sighed. Ji Tianxing said with a smile, You flatter me. Elder Du was not interested in these topics and quickly changed the topic. Let's talk about the outer space. Since you are an ascender and have seen the outer space of the lower world, then tell me, what is the difference between the sun, moon, and stars? Ji Tianxing answered concisely, the sun and the moon are also stars. They're just stars that have existed for a longer time than the sun and moon. Elder Du nodded in agreement and asked, Is the world we are in now also a star? Can it emit light, grow, and move by itself? Ji Tianxing answered without hesitation, Of course it is a star. It can also emit bright golden light. Chapter 3208. The conversation between Ji Tianxing and Elder Du was very smooth. It was not like a test, but more like two enthusiasts who were passionate about exploring the starry sky. The two talked for a long time and talked about many topics about the starry sky. In everyone's eyes, Elder Du was a knowledgeable scholar who knew the past and present as well as astronomy and geography. But in fact, his exploration and research of the starry sky was still in the initial stage of speculation and demonstration. But Ji Tianxing was different. He had entered the starry sky countless times and knew everything in the starry sky like the back of his hand. Not only had he seen the starry sky of the upper planes outside the God realm, he had also seen the starry sky of the lower planes. The conversation between the two was mostly Elder Du asking questions and he answering them. So they talked happily and even forgot about the passage of time. After Elder Du asked all the questions and received satisfactory answers, the conversation between the two of them ended. And at this time, 6 hours had already passed. The two stood side by side in the starry sky and looked at the vast stars in the distance. Elder Du said with emotion, This old man spent half of his life and looked up almost all the information that could be found to deduce and analyze these clues. I did not expect that there were still so many mistakes. Today, after talking with you, I suddenly understood and was enlightened. Tianxing, this old man wants to ask you a question. You are not a God King expert, but you seem to have been to the starry sky and know all the questions like the back of your hand. How did you do it? Did an expert impart this knowledge and experience to you? Ji Tianxing, of course, could not reveal the truth and say that he was once a peak God King and had traveled through the starry sky countless times. He also did not want to make up a lie and say that he had a God King senior or master. So, he looked at Elder Du with a smile and said, Elder Du, this is my secret and I cannot tell you. I hope you can understand. Elder Du sighed with disappointment and said with a bitter smile, Fine, since it is a secret, this old man will not ask any more. He pointed at the starry sky around him and said with a smile, This starry sky is the result of my own speculation and I spent hundreds of years to set it up. Now that I have received your guidance, this old man has to correct it as soon as possible to avoid forgetting the details. In the future, with the correct star chart, it will be much smoother for this old man to continue to deduce and analyze. As he spoke, he formed a divine seal with both hands and used a divine formation secret technique to remove the alternate dimension. Shwa! The boundless darkness dissipated, and so did the vast stars. With a flash of light, Ji Tianxing and Elder Du left the alternate space and appeared in a dimly lit hall. The hall was very spacious, with a radius of 2,000 feet. There were no lights on the surrounding walls. Only the dome was lit up with dense spots of light. Upon closer inspection, one would discover that the tens of thousands of silver dots formed a starry sky map. Ji Tianxing and Elder Du stood in the hall as if they were under the starry sky. From this, it could be seen how obsessed Elder Du was with exploring the starry sky. Ji Tianxing looked around and saw that there were over 100 bookshelves in the dark hall. Every bookshelf had a treasure box on it. There must be some precious ancient books inside. So, he asked, Elder Du, does this count as passing your test? Elder Du nodded and said with a smile, You must be joking. This old man didn't intend to test you. We were just discussing and exchanging ideas. Speaking of which, this old man has to thank you for answering my questions and giving me a lot of insights. Ji Tianxing didn't bother with pleasantries. He cupped his hands and said, "In that case, this old man will start reading these ancient books." Elder Du waved his hand and said, "You know the rules, so this old man won't repeat them. Go read the books." This old man also needs to modify the starry sky array. With that, Elder Du activated the array under his feet and entered the dark, starry sky to modify the array. Ji Tianxing didn't waste any time. He walked to the nearest bookshelf and began to read the books. He opened many treasure boxes, took out the books inside, and quickly scanned them with his divine sense. In just 100 breaths, he finished reading nearly 100 books on the bookshelf. Then, he walked to another bookshelf and repeated the same thing. The books on this floor were obviously more valuable than those on the first floor. Ancient books and records not only recorded even more secretive historical events, but also contained some secrets that were unknown to the public. Through reading these books, Ji Tianxing understood the history of the Great Yan Empire more clearly and thoroughly. He also gradually learned about the situation of the Great Yan Empire and the surrounding empires, as well as the grievances, conflicts, and disputes between them. Then, the general situation of the Tianbei region also took shape in his mind. For the whole day, he had been reading the books with full concentration and carefully memorizing the important contents. In this level of the library, he obtained a lot of useful and valuable clues, and he gained quite a lot. However, there was no clue about the turmoil 1,000 years ago, the situation of the Boundless Heaven continent, and the news outside the Boundless Heaven continent. Ji Tianxing was a little disappointed. He thought to himself, this is really strange. The Great Yan Empire has existed for tens of thousands of years, and even the historical events of 30,000 years ago are clearly recorded. The turmoil 1,000 years ago, the change of the Boundless Heaven continent's master, how earth-shattering was that? How could the Great Yan Empire not have records of it? Even if the real reason and process aren't recorded, there should at least be some clues. Could it be that someone is deliberately hiding and covering up what happened 1,000 years ago? With these questions in mind, Ji Tianxing left the second floor of the library and went to the third floor. The person guarding the third floor of the library was the leader of the 4 pavilion elders, Grand Elder Ji. It was said that he was the junior brother of the 5th emperor and had lived for more than 23,000 years. The 5th emperor was still alive and was revered as the patriarch of the Great Yan imperial family. Grand Elder Ji was very mysterious. He lived in the library all year round. He would only appear if something major happened, such as the ascension of a new emperor or if the Great Yan Empire was facing destruction. Usually, he would not appear at all. Even the emperor rarely saw him. As a result, not many people in the Great Yan Empire knew of Grand Elder Ji's existence. Although Yan Yongning had met Grand Elder Ji once and had some understanding of Grand Elder Ji's habits, he was not a kind person. He would not be so kind as to remind Ji Tianxing of anything. Hence, when Ji Tianxing entered the third floor of the library, he knew nothing about Grand Elder Ji. He did not understand Grand Elder Ji's temperament, and he could not guess what Grand Elder Ji's test was. However, he was not worried. No matter how Grand Elder Ji made things difficult for him, he was confident he could resolve it one by one. Swoosh! There was a flash of light. Ji Tianxing entered the library's third floor and appeared in the boundless darkness. He stood where he was and looked around to observe his surroundings. His surroundings were pitch black. Not only was there no light, but he also could not see anyone or anything. This made him frown. A hint of confusion flashed in his eyes. At this moment, an old and deep voice rang in the darkness. Sword piercing the 9 heavens, sword piercing the 9 heavens. Chapter 3209. Little guy, the library has never been opened to a foreign race before. It was the emperor who pleaded for you, and we were bored, so we gave you this opportunity. You should know that. The old voice was neither fast nor slow, and its tone was indifferent as it echoed in the darkness. Even with Ji Tianxing's strength, he could not detect where the voice came from. He released his divine sense to scan the surroundings, but he could not find Grand Elder Ji's voice. At this time, Grand Elder Ji continued, "Facts have proven that someone who can make the emperor personally speak is indeed not an ordinary person. You were able to pass the first floor and defeat the 2 Grand Elders, which proves that your strength is indeed very strong. You were able to pass the second floor and have a good chat with Grand Elder Du, which also proves that your knowledge is extraordinary. As for the 3rd floor, this is the core area of the library, and it is also the most hidden. However, this old man's test for you is also the simplest. Hearing these words, Ji Tianxing could not help but raise his eyebrows, and his interest was piqued. Grand Elder, please tell me. Grand Elder Ji said indifferently, I will not fight with you, nor will I talk with you. I will wait for you here. As long as you can find me, you can read the books on this floor. Ji Tianxing immediately understood and asked, Grand Elder, what you mean is, I am now in an alternate space, and this should be a formation you set up. I am trapped in the formation, and you are outside the formation, in the real library. I can only see you with my own eyes if I break your formation, right? Grand Elder Ji's voice sounded in the darkness again, and his tone was more amiable. You are a promising child. Since you understand this old man's meaning, then let's set a deadline of 1 day. If you're late, I won't wait. After saying that, Grand Elder Ji fell silent and did not reply. Ji Tianxing did not waste any more time and hurriedly used his divine sense to scan the surroundings. His divine sense extended to a radius of 20,000 kilometers, but what he saw was still boundless darkness, as if there was no end to it. Thus, he used the God's Eye mystic technique again and flew quickly in the darkness while observing the structure of the formation. After about 100 breaths, he roughly saw the structure of the formation and could not help but click his tongue in amazement. If this is a divine formation set up by Grand Elder Ji alone, then it is truly incredible. Although it was still a monarch-grade divine array, it had reached the pinnacle of monarch-grade divine arrays. His attainments in array formation, structure, and thought processes far surpassed all other divine lord powerhouses. From this, it could be seen that although this was a monarch-grade divine array, it was showing signs of breaking through to a king-grade divine array. This included Elder Ji's exploration and research of the Tao of formations, as well as his speculations and judgments regarding king-grade divine formations. To be more precise, this is a divine array between the monarch level and the king level. Ji Tianxing muttered to himself as he observed the structure of the divine array. Although he had once been a peak god king, he knew all kinds of king-grade divine formations like the back of his hand. He was already used to seeing monarch-grade divine arrays and didn't care about them at all. However, in such a situation, Pavilion Elder Ji was actually able to set up such a perfect monarch-grade divine formation. His foundation, attainments and thoughts in setting up arrays were already comparable to a first or second stage divine king. He couldn't help but marvel at this. Of course, Grand Elder Ji could hear his muttering. After a moment of silence, Grand Elder Ji's voice rang out in the darkness. This is a huge array that I have spent more than 300 years to set up after meticulously studying and improving it. Although I believe that this is already the limit of a monarch-grade divine array and is close to perfection, this is nothing. After all, I have spent more than 300 years on it. Even if you flatter me like this, it is useless. However, you are so young, but you are actually proficient in array Tao. You can see the depth of this divine array so quickly. It is indeed impressive. Ji Tianxing had a high opinion of Grand Elder Ji's array Tao attainments. However, Grand Elder Ji didn't become arrogant or complacent because of this. His reaction was also rather calm. From this, it could be seen that he had been in seclusion in the library for 10,000 years. His temperament was already as indifferent as water. Ji Tianxing didn't say anything else. He focused on observing the divine array and thinking of a way to break it. Time passed quietly. 2 hours, 4 hours. Very quickly, 6 hours had passed. Ji Tianxing was still flying in the darkness, carefully observing the divine array and thinking of a way to break it. At this moment, Grand Elder Ji, who had been silent for a long time, reminded him again, "What you said just now made sense. Why didn't you break it after so long? Don't forget that you only have 1 day. Also, if you want to see me with your own eyes, you have to break 3 layers of arrays. This is only the first layer and you have already spent so much time. It seems that you won't be able to see me. Hearing this, Ji Tianxing was still not anxious. He even smiled and nodded. As I expected, this is only the first layer of arrays. There are a total of 3 layers of arrays. Grand Elder Ji didn't reply and fell into silence again. After observing for a quarter of an hour, Ji Tianxing finally understood what was going on. Then, he began to cast a spell to break the formation. He sat cross-legged in the darkness, his golden eyes staring into the darkness. He formed a divine art with both hands and shot out thousands of divine lights. Swish, swish, swish. Tens of thousands of dazzling divine lights flew out in all directions and landed in every corner of the darkness. At first, Grand Elder Ji was secretly observing and couldn't find any clues. He only felt that Ji Tianxing's method of breaking the array looked decent, but it was actually fancy and impractical. However, 2 hours later, Elder Ji's face turned pale with fright as he let out a low cry of shock. This works? At first, he didn't understand Ji Tianxing's intention, but now he understood. Ji Tianxing's method was like setting up an array. He had set up a wisp of divine power at each of the tens of millions of nodes of the divine array. After he spent 6 hours to complete this step, it was equivalent to setting up a large formation. Then, an inconceivable scene appeared. Ji Tianxing set up a mysterious divine seal at the last node. Immediately, the node of the array exploded and released a dazzling divine light. Then, with that node as the center, the divine light spread in all directions and quickly exploded. Swish, swish, swish. In the darkness, dense divine light burst out in all directions, like millions of stars. In just 100 breaths, the first layer of the divine array was completely broken. This kind of breaking wasn't opening a hole in the divine array. It was completely breaking it down and closing it. Elder Ji was dumbfounded. He gasped in amazement and his heart was filled with shock. So you can break the divine array like this? In the beginning, this brat had been setting up the formation, and only at the last moment did he pull out the silk from the cocoon and disintegrate the formation. He had a thorough understanding of the divine array to achieve such an effect. Chapter 32:10. Swish. As thousands of rays of divine light shone, the first divine array disintegrated. The boundless darkness finally retreated and Ji Tianxing appeared in the second divine array. This was a beautiful place where the sun was shining brightly and the flowers were fragrant. The sun shone brightly in the blue sky. Countless colorful divine birds flew past in flocks. The ground below was covered with grass and trees. Not far away, there were towering mountains and green water. The air was fresh and the world was peaceful. He could only smell the fragrance of flowers and hear the sound of water and birds. At first glance, this place was full of divine power and should be a good place for cultivation. But Ji Tianxing knew that this was just an illusion. This was a scene created by Elder Ji with the divine array. If he couldn't see through this and was deceived by the illusion, he would be trapped in the divine array and wouldn't be able to leave. So, he used the divine eye secret technique again and carefully observed the green mountains and water. Seeing his reaction, Grand Elder Ji's voice sounded from the blue sky. Elder Ji sighed and said, "Little guy, although you used an amazing method to break the first divine array just now, it's still not enough. Your attainments in Array Dao, your understanding of Array Dao, and your train of thought make this old man admire you. But you've already used half a day. You only have 12 hours left and it's impossible for you to break 2 divine arrays. You're destined to fail." In fact, Elder Ji had already been convinced by Ji Tianxing's array skills. He even felt that Ji Tianxing's attainments and talent in the formation Dao were even more profound than his. If it was possible, he also wanted to exchange his knowledge of Array Dao with Ji Tianxing. But he had said that the time limit was 1 day, so he had to keep his word. Even though he felt sorry and regretful, he couldn't be extra kind to Ji Tianxing. So, he was sure that Ji Tianxing wouldn't be able to break 2 divine arrays and see him in 12 hours. However, what Elder Ji didn't expect was that Ji Tianxing only observed for 15 minutes before he started to break the arrays. He kept moving in the sky and his golden eyes saw through the illusion. He only stared at the nodes of the divine array. Both of his hands formed a divine incantation, sending out dazzling divine light into the surrounding heaven and earth. Upon seeing this, Elder Ji fell silent for a moment before sighing once more. "Lad, now that you know that time is of the essence, there's no point in being anxious." In his opinion, Ji Tianxing had spent a total of 6 hours observing the first divine formation. However, when he was trying to decipher the second layer of the divine formation, he had only observed it for a quarter of an hour before impatiently trying to decipher the formation. This was too impatient. He definitely didn't even see the structure of the formation clearly. However, half an hour later, Elder Ji was shocked again. Crack! A crack suddenly appeared in the originally calm blue sky. Ji Tianxing continued to shoot divine light into the crack. Suddenly, the crack expanded rapidly, turning into a huge gap. After a few more breaths of time, the gap turned into a huge vortex and began to expand rapidly. The surrounding sky, earth, mountains, and rivers were all swallowed up by the vortex. It was clear that the second formation had also been broken by Ji Tianxing. Moreover, his method of deciphering the divine formation this time was different from before. Previously, he had completely disintegrated the formation, but now he was gradually breaking the entire formation. Elder Ji was inexplicably shocked and exclaimed, "This? You only roughly observed it, and you were able to break my formation in such a short time? This is too unbelievable. How did you do it?" Ji Tianxing stopped casting and allowed the huge black vortex to devour the remaining mountains and rivers. He replied with a calm expression, "Elder Ji, although you set up 3 layers of the divine formation, these formations were all created by you. Even if you added some new techniques to each formation, the main idea of the formation did not change. When I observed the first divine formation, it took me a long time to see through your idea of setting up the formation. Therefore, when I deciphered the second divine formation, it was naturally easy." As his voice fell, the mountains and rivers completely disappeared, and the second layer of the divine formation was deciphered. Grand Elder Ji was stunned. After a long silence, he finally spoke with a solemn tone. "Amazing!" There was a flash of light. Ji Tianxing appeared in the third layer of the divine formation. This was a boundless azure sea with turbulent undercurrents and towering waves. The sky was dark and gloomy, and dark clouds gathered. The sea roared, releasing a monstrous, ferocious aura. Apart from that, there was nothing else in this space. Ji Tianxing observed for another 15 minutes and began to decipher the formation. He had already told the reason and the truth, so Elder Ji remained silent and did not say anything. Of course, Elder Ji already had an answer in his heart and guessed the result. As expected, Ji Tianxing cast for 15 minutes and deciphered the formation. It was still the same method of deciphering the formation. Cracks first appeared in the gloomy sky, which then turned into gaps and vortexes, crazily devouring the sky and sea. In less than 15 minutes, the sky and sea disappeared. The third layer of the divine formation was also broken. Swoosh! There was a flash of light, and Ji Tianxing appeared in a dark space. This space was vast and boundless, and it was surrounded by boundless darkness. There was only an area with a radius of 100 feet in the center, which was lit up with specks of light. When he got closer, he saw that there were clearly over 100 colorful jade slips floating in the darkness, emitting a dense light. Under the many jade slips, there was a purple jade futon floating in the darkness. A skinny old man in a gray linen robe was sitting cross-legged on the futon, looking at him quietly. Without a doubt, this was the third level of the library. It was not a hall, and there were no bookshelves for books. It was just a dark space, one person, and 100 jade slips. It was extremely simple and plain. However, it was also extremely mysterious and hidden. Ji Tianxing stepped into the darkness and walked toward the bright area, his eyes landing on the old man in gray. "Greetings, Elder Ji." Elder Ji nodded slightly and said with an amiable expression, "Little fellow, you have really broadened my horizons today. In the great Yan Empire, you are the true number 1 array formation cultivator." Indeed, Elder Ji's strength had long reached the peak of the Divine Lord realm. However, he had not been able to take the final step and break through to the Divine King realm in the past 10,000 years. Therefore, he could only think of other methods and focus on studying array formations, hoping to find an opportunity to break through to the Divine King realm. In the Great Yan Empire, if his array formation skills were ranked second, no one would dare to be ranked first. However, Ji Tianxing broke the 3 divine formations that he was most proud of in a short 14 hours. Moreover, Ji Tianxing had also used different methods to break the array, displaying his terrifying talent in array formation. While Elder Ji was shocked, he could not help but be envious. He even thought that if he had Ji Tianxing's monstrous array formation talent, he would have broken through to the Divine King realm 10,000 years ago. Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 32:11. Grand Elder Ji's compliment was, of course, sincere. When Ji Tianxing heard this, he didn't deliberately try to be humble. After all, Grand Elder Ji was speaking the truth. Grand Elder Ji's array formation skills were undoubtedly the best in the Great Yan Empire. However, Ji Tianxing was able to consecutively break the 3 arrays that he had spent half his life setting up in just a few hours. From this, one could see how powerful Ji Tianxing's array formation skills were. He looked at Grand Elder Ji and said, "Grand Elder Ji, I broke the 3 arrays and saw with my own eyes that you have passed the test." Grand Elder Ji knew what he wanted to say, so he nodded and said, "Don't worry. I'm a man of my word. You can read these ancient books and records now." However, the books and records collected here are the Great Yan Empire's most important secrets. I have to fulfill my duty and accompany you to read them. To put it nicely, he was accompanying him, but actually, he was watching him. After all, these ancient books and records were really too important to the Great Yan Empire. Ji Tianxing had already expected this, so he was not angry. He nodded and thanked him. Grand Elder Ji waved his hand and said sincerely, "Actually, I should be the one thanking you. Before this, I always thought that my array formation skills had reached a bottleneck. The divine array that I set up has reached the peak of the monarch level and is already close to perfection. There is nothing to improve. However, I saw the process of you breaking the arrays just now and realized that this idea was laughable. I also saw the flaws and the direction of improvement." Ji Tianxing did not say anything else and started to read the books and records here. Hundreds of jade slips floated in the dark sky, each emitting a different divine light. Many ancient books and records were stored in each jade slip. This way of preservation could allow these records to last longer and not be eroded by time and external forces. At the same time, it was also very convenient for Ji Tianxing to read. He picked up one jade slip after another and used his divine sense to read the records inside. After reading the information inside the jade slip, he was stunned. A look of surprise flashed across his eyes. Because the information recorded in the jade slip was indeed the top secret of the Great Yan Empire. There were detailed records of the names, life experiences, and cultivation methods of the second emperor all the way to the previous emperor. Furthermore, the important things that each emperor had done, and which concubines and children they had, were all clearly recorded. Ji Tianxing had a clearer understanding of the past emperors of the Great Yan Empire after reading the information in the jade slip. After putting away the jade slip, Ji Tianxing put it back in its original place and prepared to check the next jade slip. At this moment, Elder Ji, who had been staring at him from behind, reminded him, "Kid, the jade chip you checked just now is an important secret of the empire. As for the jade slip you're about to read, it's even more confidential. I'm sorry, but with your current status, you can't access that information. Unless you join the empire and serve the emperor will give you a high position and a generous salary." Ji Tianxing had already expected this. This was the 3rd floor of the book collection pavilion, where the most precious and confidential books were stored. They definitely couldn't be completely open to him. After all, to the Great Yan Empire, he was an outsider. However, the more Elder Ji stared at him and prevented him from reading the golden jade slip, the more he was itching to read it. Thus, he solemnly said to Elder Ji, Elder Ji, I can't serve the Great Yan Empire, but I won't harm the Great Yan Empire either. Please allow me to read this information. I promise that I won't come back after leaving the imperial city. Seeing that he was serious, Elder Ji hesitated for a moment before nodding. All right, remember what you said just now. After receiving Elder Ji's silent consent, Ji Tianxing hurriedly released his divine senses and read the information in the golden jade slip. As expected, the information recorded in this jade slip was even more confidential than the previous one. The jade slip recorded all the major events that had happened in the Great Yan Empire from 10,000 years ago until now. It included the conflicts between the royal family's descendants, the disputes between the various factions, and the complicated relationships between the various factions. There were also detailed records of the relations and grievances between the Great Yan Empire and the two neighboring empires. The cause, process, and outcome were all recorded. Ji Tianxing then knew that the Heavenly Sage Empire in the southeast and the Changfeng Empire in the southwest both had deep enmity with the Great Yan Empire. In fact, the disappearance and death of the previous emperor might also be related to the two empires. However, the Great Yan Empire had sent people to investigate for many years, but they still couldn't find the truth or the reason. They couldn't find any evidence against the other party. In addition, the Azura God Emperor had unified the boundless heaven continent. All the regions had to recuperate and couldn't start another war. Thus, the three empires could only endure and secretly conserve their strength. Whoever started a war would definitely be punished by the Heavenly North Protectorate Lord. After all, the Heavenly North Protectorate Lord had become a god king 1,000 years ago and was an unparalleled powerhouse who had intimidated hundreds of countries. When Ji Tianxing saw this, he immediately became interested, and his heartbeat slowed down. He finally found information about 1,000 years ago. He continued to read the rest of the contents and quickly found some useful clues. The jade slip vaguely mentioned that the boundless heaven continent 1,000 years ago indeed had a huge upheaval. But that was a dispute between unparalleled god kings and had nothing to do with the people of the divine race. The Great Yan Empire was also not clear about what exactly happened. They only knew that after the great upheaval ended, an Azura God Emperor appeared out of nowhere and intimidated all the Protectorate Lords. From then on, the Azura God Emperor became the overlord of the boundless heaven continent and was revered and worshipped by hundreds of millions of people. After reading this information, Ji Tianxing secretly thought in his heart, the great battle between the gods and me 1,000 years ago was carried out in the starry sky outside the realm. It indeed didn't have much impact on the divine world. It's also natural that the ordinary divine race in the divine world didn't know the specific situation. After I perished, I reincarnated with the heaven-punishing formation diagram. Those 5 peak god kings only obtained the eternal heavenly book. Could it be that they negotiated peacefully and comprehended the eternal heavenly book together and all obtained fortuitous opportunities and breakthroughs? They took the final step, broke through to the god king realm, and became the supreme god emperor, each dominating a continent? But this isn't right either. The divine world only has 4 continents, but they have 5 people. There's no way to divide it equally. The present Ji Tianxing, his understanding of the divine world was still stuck at the memories from 1,000 years ago. These that he analyzed seemed logical, but it was also just his conjecture. Only by understanding the situation outside the boundless heaven continent and knowing who the overlords of the other 3 continents were could he confirm whether his inference was correct or not. Hence, Ji Tianxing continued to read even more jade slips, searching for clues from there. He really wanted to know how the situation of the other 3 continents was like. How was the overall situation of the divine world? Which overlords were there? Those 5 peak god kings back then, who were still alive. Chapter 32:12. Time passed quietly. Ji Tianxing was in the dark void, fully focused on reading the jade slips. Grand Elder Ji remained silent and stared at him patiently. Seeing Ji Tianxing's serious and solemn expression, Grand Elder Ji was also puzzled. What is this kid trying to find? He has read so many top-secret documents and knows a lot about the Empire's secrets. However, he doesn't seem to be interested in the Empire's secrets. Instead, he is more interested in some anecdotes and legends. Grand Elder Ji had basically read all the hundreds of jade slips here. Of course, he knew what information was recorded in which jade slips. Previously, he had been a little worried that Ji Tianxing knew too much about the Empire's secrets, which would be detrimental to the Empire. However, Ji Tianxing had assured him that he would never return after leaving the Imperial City, so he was much more at ease. Now, Ji Tianxing was clearly not interested in the Great Yan Empire's secrets when he read the information in the jade slips. This made Grand Elder Ji secretly relieved, but at the same time he was puzzled. Hence, after Ji Tianxing read 76 jade slips, Grand Elder Ji couldn't help but ask, "Kid, what are you looking for?" Ji Tianxing looked back at him and said, "Nothing. Some information that is not very important to the Great Yan Empire." Grand Elder Ji frowned and said, "The jade slips that you read before recorded the Empire's secrets. You don't seem to care?" The remaining 20 or so jade chips recorded some anecdotes and secrets that had nothing to do with the Imperium. "Are you sure you want to continue reading? I have seen those jade slips and remember the contents. Why don't you ask me directly?" Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and nodded slightly. "That's good. I can save some time. Grand Elder Ji, do you know what the great turmoil 1,000 years ago was?" Grand Elder Ji frowned and suddenly understood. "So, this is what you want to investigate?" Ji Tianxing nodded and asked, "Seems like you know something?" Elder Ji nodded slightly. His tone was calm as he said, "Although this old man is not a well-read person, I have read all the jade slips here." Combining the information in the various jade slips, he was able to conclude some clues. 1,000 years ago, there was indeed chaos in this world, but no one knew what exactly happened. This old man only knows that should be a war between unparalleled divine kings. Furthermore, it didn't happen in the boundless heaven continent. After that great chaos, an expert even more powerful than the God King appeared in this world. He was the current overlord of the continent, the Azura God Emperor. Before that, this old man had never heard of the Azura God Emperor. He seemed to have appeared out of thin air and descended upon the boundless heaven continent. With a valiant and domineering attitude, he intimidated all of the domain lords and peak divine kings into submission. From then on, he became the overlord of the boundless heaven continent. Elder Ji's words matched Ji Tianxing's conjecture. He nodded to show that he understood, then asked, "Then may I ask where the Azura God Emperor resides?" Elder Ji shook his head and said with a bitter smile, "That kind of supreme expert is definitely mysterious and unfathomable. It's hard for ordinary people to see him. How can an ant-like weakling like this old man possibly know where the God Emperor resides? But one thing is certain, it's definitely not in the Tianbei region." Ji Tianxing was not surprised by this and continued to ask, "Then do you know the topography of this world? For example, other than the boundless heaven continent, what other places are there?" Elder Ji thought for a moment and said with a bitter smile, "This question, you're not the only one who will ask. Actually, many powerhouses will also have such doubts. However, our strength and status are too low. Even outside the Tianbei region, we don't know enough about the situation of the boundless heaven continent. How can we possibly know the topography outside the continent? Of course, this old man has communicated and discussed with Elder Du before. According to our conjecture, there should be more than one boundless heaven continent in this world. Outside the boundless heaven continent, there should be a boundless ocean where countless sea beasts and foreign races live. In that vast ocean, there might still be other continents." Ji Tianxing could not help but nod in agreement. He asked, "Then do you know what the other continents are called? What's the situation?" Elder Ji spread out his hands and said helplessly, "This is only our conjecture, but there's no way to verify it. After all, since the Great Yan Empire was established, it has been nearly 30,000 years, and we haven't seen any powerhouses from other continents. In fact, we haven't even heard of them." After a pause, Elder Ji seemed to have suddenly thought of something and hurriedly added, "That's right, this old man remembered something. There's something you should want to know. About 700 years ago, When the empire's envoy went to the Changfeng Empire, he encountered a powerhouse. At that time, that powerhouse was being chased by many powerhouses. When he fled in panic, he hid among the empire's envoy team. The pursuers attacked a few times to test the waters, but when they saw that the empire's envoy team had many people, they quickly retreated. The empire's envoy asked that powerhouse what had happened. That powerhouse was seriously injured and was on the verge of fainting. His words were also unclear. That person said that he came from the land of heaven and accidentally entered the ruins and came here by accident. Before that person could explain the situation, he fainted. Land of heaven? Ji Tianxing narrowed his eyes slightly and thought to himself, could it be the land of heaven? He was somewhat expectant and asked, Elder Ji, what happened after that? Did the emissary of the Imperium ask about the situation? Elder Ji explained, after that powerhouse fainted, the Empire's envoy took him and sent people to take care of him. He was going to ask him when he woke up. Unexpectedly, that powerhouse mysteriously disappeared that night and never appeared again. After the Empire's envoy returned, he told the Emperor about this matter. However, that powerhouse didn't say anything in detail. What land of heaven? It's a name that we've never heard of, so no one paid attention to it. Only Elder Du and I have nothing to do and are passionate about exploring astronomy, geography, and array formation, so we remembered such a small matter. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said, this kind of trivial matter really doesn't mean anything. In fact, he didn't think so in his heart. Elder Ji and Elder Du didn't know what land of heaven was, but he was sure that it was the land of heaven. 700 years ago, the great chaos had already ended. Those peak divine kings should have broken through the God Emperor and controlled the continents. Since someone came from the land of heaven, it means that the land still exists. Ji Tianxing thought silently and gradually had an answer in his heart. The realm of gods is the main world and has existed since ancient times. The 4 continents of the realm of gods are also extremely vast and boundless. As long as the realm of gods doesn't collapse, the 4 continents should still exist. My worries are unnecessary. Chapter 32:13. Ji Tianxing was 70 to 80% sure that the situation in the divine world had not changed. However, he had questions in his heart. He urgently wanted to know who the overlords of the other 3 continents were. It should be those peak god kings, right? After all, they had obtained the eternal heavenly book and should be able to break through to the God Emperor realm like the Azura God Emperor. If that was the case, then his mortal enemies were all standing at the peak of the divine world. Not only were they the overlords of the continents, but they were also the strongest in the divine world. As such, his path of revenge would be incomparably difficult and his chances were slim. However, Ji Tianxing was not discouraged, nor would he give up. The God Emperor realm? In my previous life, I was unable to take the final step. In this life, I will not repeat the same mistake. I must break through the limit of the God King realm and reach the peak of the divine path. Wait for me, I will be back soon. Ji Tianxing secretly swore in his heart. His willpower was incomparably firm. Next, he asked Elder Ji a few more questions and indirectly inquired about the situation. However, it was a pity that Grand Elder Ji didn't know much. Ji Tianxing felt helpless, but he could understand. After all, Elder Ji had stayed in the Tianbei region his entire life and had only been to the surrounding empires at most. How could someone who had not even left the Tianbei region know about matters outside the continent? Their trip to the library had come to an end. Ji Tianxing thanked Elder Ji and left the dark space. Swoosh! Through the teleportation array, he left the library and returned to the square outside the palace. Although he did not achieve his goal of coming to the imperial city this time, it was not without gains. At least, he was more confident that the situation in the divine world had not changed. At the same time, he also set a goal and direction for the future. The most important thing was to recover to the God King realm as soon as possible. Only when he returned to the God King realm could he enter the outer space, collect stars and refining materials, and help the burial of heaven return to the King realm. Only when he reached the God King realm could he cross the vast boundless heaven continent and investigate the Azura God Emperor, and leave the boundless heaven continent and head to the other 3 continents. In the eyes of ordinary divine races, peak divine lords were powerhouses that roamed the world unhindered. However, in Ji Tianxing's opinion, only divine king experts had the qualifications to move unhindered in the god realm, freely traversing the starry skies and the various continents. The Black Flame Governor had been waiting outside the library, silently waiting for the result. For 3 whole days, he transformed into a wisp of black mist and quietly floated in the air. He had already made plans to wait for a long time. In his opinion, it would definitely take a long time for the 4 cabinet elders to deliberately make things difficult for Ji Tianxing. However, at this moment, a divine light flashed in front of him, and Ji Tianxing suddenly appeared. The Black Flame Governor froze for a moment before a thought popped up in his mind. That brat came out so quickly? Previously, she had always felt that he was unfathomable and powerful, but she didn't expect him to only have this much ability. Coming out in just 3 days, he definitely didn't pass the 4 elders test. Although he thought so, the Black Flame Governor did not appear, and it was impossible for him to ask Ji Tianxing about the result. He did not forget the task on his shoulders and immediately sent a message to report the result to Yan Yongning. Yan Yongning was resting in his residence when he received the report from the Black Flame Governor and hurried over. A golden light flashed. Yan Yongning appeared in the square outside the hall and stood in front of Ji Tianxing. He looked at Ji Tianxing with a faint smile and asked, "It's only been 3 days, why did you come out?" Although he did not say it explicitly, his meaning was obvious. Ji Tianxing definitely did not pass the 4 elders test and left the library with a gloomy face. Seeing Yan Yongning's expression, how could Ji Tianxing not understand what he was thinking? You want to see this monarch make a fool of himself? He raised his eyebrows and asked with a displeased expression. Seeing his reaction, Yan Yongning was 80% sure in his heart and secretly sneered. However, he refused to admit it and said with a smile, "I'm not that kind of person. I know how powerful the 4 elders are. It's normal that you didn't pass the test, don't be depressed." Yan Yongning pretended to comfort Ji Tianxing, but in fact, he was overjoyed. After all, ever since he came into contact with Ji Tianxing, he always had a feeling of being looked down upon and suppressed, which made him feel quite depressed. Being able to see Ji Tianxing suffer, of course, it was very satisfying. Unexpectedly, before he finished speaking, Ji Tianxing said expressionlessly, "The strongest person in the empire is the 5th emperor, Yan Tiangang, who was born 23,000 years ago and is called the Old Ancestor. The second strongest person after Yan Tiangang is his junior brother, Elder Ji, who specializes in array Dao. He has been cultivating array Dao for 10,000 years and wants to use array Dao to break through to the Divine King realm." Hearing this, the smile on Yan Yongning's face froze. He frowned and asked, What do you mean?" Ji Tianxing said with a playful smile, "This monarch knows your 8 generations of ancestors like the back of his hand. I can tell you all their names and life experiences. Guess what this monarch means?" Yan Yongning's eyes suddenly widened, revealing a look of disbelief as he exclaimed, You passed the 4 elders test and checked the books on the 3rd floor?" Ji Tianxing nodded with a smile and said, "Not only that, this monarch also gave Elder Du and Elder Ji some pointers. I believe that it won't take long for their strength to improve greatly. This is just a small matter. Take it as a gift to them. You don't have to thank me." Yan Yongning was petrified on the spot. He stared at him dumbfoundedly, not knowing what to say. Deep in his heart, he absolutely did not believe and could not accept this result. However, his rationality told him that Ji Tianxing was telling the truth. After he came back to his senses, a thought immediately appeared in his mind. "It's over. This kid has checked all the books in the library. I'm afraid he knows the situation and secrets of the Great Yan Empire better than I do. With his unruly character, he definitely won't be willing to submit to me. If I let him go, he will become extremely dangerous. He can become a sharp blade that stabs the empire at any time. What should I do? Do all I can to make him stay?" Firmly control him? Yan Yongning's expression became extremely grave as he hesitated and weighed the pros and cons in his heart. It was also at this moment that Ji Tianxing walked out of the hall. When he passed by him, he said with a smile, "Now that I know the great Yan Empire better than you must be very worried, right? Are you going to mobilize all the powerful people in the imperial city to kill me here? Or are you going to capture me, seal me, and firmly control me?" Yan Yongning's body trembled, and his expression became extremely ugly. All the nerves in his body were also tense. Ji Tianxing brushed past him and walked into the distance. He said calmly with a smile, "Don't be so suspicious. I don't care about the great Yan Empire at all. Also, I'm leaving the imperial city today and will not return. Soon, I will leave the great Yan Empire, and you will have nothing to worry about." Chapter 32:14. Ji Tianxing left the library and disappeared at the end of the square. Yan Yongning stood on the spot with a complicated expression on his face. After hearing Ji Tianxing's words, he first heaved a sigh of relief and calmed down. However, when he came back to his senses, anger and humiliation surged in his heart. As a result, he was so angry that his face turned green. He cursed fiercely, "Bastard! Damn bastard! How dare you be so arrogant in front of me and speak such nonsense? Lawless brat, you've gone too far." At this moment, he deeply and truly felt Ji Tianxing's arrogance and pride. New 81 Chinese Network also, when Ji Tianxing said those words, he looked down on him with disdain and arrogance. These were like sharp knives that stabbed into his heart, making him feel even more humiliated and angry. He had never been so despised and insulted in his life. New 81 Chinese Network update fastest mobile phone. // Yan Yongning was so angry that he gritted his teeth and cracked his knuckles. For a moment, he really wanted to act impulsively and gather all the experts in the imperial city to kill Ji Tianxing in the imperial city. However, when he turned around, Ji Tianxing had already left and disappeared into the distance. He quickly calmed down and took a deep breath, suppressing the anger in his heart. Forget it. That brat has always been like this. Otherwise, he wouldn't have caused so much trouble everywhere he goes. I'm magnanimous and can't be bothered to argue with him. I don't want to lower myself to his level. Yan Yongning muttered to himself and gradually dispelled the anger in his heart. After Ji Tianxing left the imperial city, he headed south and quickly left the imperial city. Although he had caused a disturbance at the city gate 3 days ago. Now, the disturbance had passed and everything had calmed down. Even his exit from the city was very smooth. The city guards at the city gate recognized him and let him through. He had achieved his goal of coming to the imperial city this time. After leaving the imperial city, he would not return unless there was a special reason. Facing the setting sun, he flew into the sky and took out the divine ship and headed northwest. Inside the divine ship, in the cockpit, Ji Tianxing stood with his hands clasped behind his back. He gazed at the sky outside the divine warship as he pondered silently. As Wang Lin steered the divine ship, she asked, "Did you achieve your wish after coming to the imperial city?" Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "I guess so." Wang Lin frowned and thought for a moment, then asked, "Then where are we going next? Are you going to seek revenge on Prince Lien?" Ji Tianxing nodded again and explained, "Let's go to the northwest of the Great Yan Empire and take a look at the Green Jade Palace. Taking revenge on Prince Lien is secondary. The main thing is to pay homage to the residence of an old friend and take some things." Wang Lin frowned and sneered, "Visit the residence of an old friend? Pick up something along the way? I realize that you are a shameless person." He was clearly going to explore the Green Jade Palace and snatch the treasures from the various major forces. Why does it sound so natural coming out of your mouth? Ji Tianxing spread his hands helplessly and said, "The Green Jade King and I are really old friends." Ah! Wang Lin rolled her eyes and smiled disdainfully. The Green Jade King left the Great Yan Empire 10,000 years ago and disappeared without a trace. Don't tell me that you were born 10,000 years ago? Ji Tianxing was speechless. Shui Lin became even more smug and said angrily, "You have nothing to say, right? Do you think you can fool me with that little thought of yours?" Ji Tianxing could not take it anymore and said angrily, "Focus on your work." "Are you angry and ashamed? Are you guilty?" Shui Lin smiled even more smugly. Meanwhile, at the northwest border of the Great Yan Empire, in the Cloud Sea mystic realm, in the depths of the vast sea of clouds, there was a transparent, illusory, and hazy huge divine palace that emitted a faint holy light. This was the Green Jade Palace. There were still 50 groups of god race experts stationed around the divine palace. These people were scattered all over the sea of clouds. Hundreds of them were gathered together and protected by a 5-colored light shield. At the same time, in the 5-colored light shield where the Heavenly Union sect was, more than 100 elite disciples were guarding the 4 sides of the light shield, vigilant and alert. In the middle of the 5-colored light shield, there were more than a dozen temporary houses and palaces where the deacons, elders, and experts of the Heavenly Union sect lived. In a dazzling palace, Prince Lien, who was dressed in a black dragon robe with golden patterns, was sitting in the study and silently meditating. At the same time, he seemed to be waiting for something. Before long, a black figure walked quickly into the study, came to the desk, and bowed to Prince Lien. "Your subordinate, Lien San, greets your highness." Prince Lien, who was meditating, immediately opened his eyes and looked at Lien San. He asked in a dignified tone, "What's the result of the matter I asked you to find out?" Lien San cupped his hands and reported, "Your highness, it's just as you expected. Tianxing, that bastard, did not chase us here. Instead, he went to the Imperial City. Our informant in the Imperial City just sent back news that Tianxing had a conflict with the city guards when he entered the Imperial City. Tianxing was very rude and overbearing and injured nearly 100 city guards in public. After that, the Imperial guards took care of the matter personally and took Tianxing into the Imperial Palace. Our informant reported that Tianxing seemed to have gone to see the Emperor. No one knows what they talked about or what kind of deal they made. In short, Tianxing stayed in the Imperial Palace for 3 days before leaving. He reported everything that had happened in the Imperial City in detail 3 times in a row. However, no one knew about the agreement between Ji Tianxing and Yan Yongning, as well as the matter of him entering the library. Prince Lien immediately frowned and asked with a gloomy face, "Which direction did that bastard go after leaving the Imperial City?" Lien San was startled for a moment. He lowered his head and said, "The informant we left in the Imperial City is much weaker than Tianxing. After leaving the Imperial City, he was shaken off not long after he left. However, the direction Tianxing left was not south, but northwest." Northwest? Grand Prince Lien's brows furrowed as a serious look flashed across his eyes. "So, he came for the Cloud Sea secret realm?" Lien San didn't know the exact answer and didn't dare to make wild guesses. Of course, he didn't dare to answer. Prince Lien's face was gloomy. While thinking, he muttered to himself, "Damn bastard. He couldn't catch up with me and didn't know where I went, so he went to the Imperial City to find Yan Yongning. Yan Yongning, that bastard, can't wait for me to die, so of course he would tell him the truth. Both of them want to get rid of me, so they must have hit it off and colluded with each other. Now that he knows I'm in the Cloud Sea secret realm, of course he can't wait to take revenge." Seeing Prince Lien full of anger and worry, Lien San hurriedly comforted him, "Your Highness, don't be angry and don't worry. Now in the Cloud Sea secret realm, 50 forces have gathered and experts have gathered. How can that brat be so presumptuous? If he really comes here, he will become the target of public criticism and die without a burial place." Prince Lien nodded thoughtfully and sneered, "Although I and the people from the He-Tian sect may not be able to stop him. But with 50 forces here, almost all of the top experts in the Empire have gathered here. Even if he has great ability, he will be besieged by so many experts and die with hatred." Chapter 32:15. The distance from the Imperial City to the northwest border was 100 million miles. Even though Lin Shui was driving the divine ship at full speed, it still took half a month to arrive. That evening, when the sun was setting, the black divine ship flew into the sea of clouds and shuttled rapidly. Not long after, Lin Shui sensed that something was amiss and quickly called for Ji Tianxing. For the past half a month, Ji Tianxing had been in the secret chamber. He stayed in the distorted time and space of the Jiutian Tenju Tower to cultivate in seclusion. Half a month had passed in the outside world, but he had spent more than 2 years in the distorted time and space. After more than 2 years of cultivation, he had perfected the heaven-punishing divine technique. The second level of the technique was about to take shape. His strength had also reached the peak of the 8th level and was not far from the 9th level of the Divine Lord realm. Hearing Lin Shui's telepathic message, Ji Tianxing quickly ended his cultivation and left the divine pagoda. Returning to the secret chamber, he put away the divine pagoda and hurried to the control room. At this moment, Lin Shui was releasing her divine power to control the array of the divine ship. Seeing her reaction, Ji Tianxing asked, "We've already arrived at the Cloud Sea Mystic Realm? What are you doing? What's going on?" Lin Shui quickly answered, "This Cloud Sea Mystic Realm is strange. The divine ship just entered and flew for 15 minutes before we lost our way. Also, we seem to have fallen into a folded space and kept going in circles. We can't get out." Ji Tianxing was already mentally prepared. He said calmly, "Don't worry, the Cloud Sea Mystic Realm has this effect. Let me solve it." With that, he asked Lin Shui to close the divine array and stop the divine ship. Lin Shui and the others stayed in the divine ship. He left the divine ship alone and appeared in the Cloud Sea. Then, the divine ship shrunk to the size of a melon seed and he kept it with him. It would be more convenient and safer for him to act alone. Sush. He used the God's Eye mystic technique and his eyes turned golden. He carefully observed the situation around him. After a while, he realized that Lin Shui's judgment was right. The divine ship had fallen into a folded space. If he could not find a way out, the divine ship would be trapped here forever, unable to leave. When the godly power was exhausted and the divine warship was destroyed, everyone would perish. However, Ji Tianxing could tell that this complicated folded space was formed by the Cloud Sea Secret Realm's heaven and earth divine power. He thought for a moment and thought of a way to break it. Then, he began to use his divine ability to disintegrate layer after layer of folded space. A series of cracks instantly appeared in the seemingly calm sky and sea of clouds. 5-colored divine light flashed through the cracks. In less than an hour, Ji Tianxing broke through the 7-fold folded space and successfully escaped. Next, he flew into the depths of the Cloud Sea Secret Realm alone. Along the way, he remained vigilant and paid attention to his surroundings. Even though the Cloud Sea Secret Realm was filled with hidden dangers, there were hundreds of dangers. However, he was able to discover them in advance and avoid all of them, saving a lot of time. One day later, it was late at night and the world was dark. The White Cloud Sea Secret Realm had also become hazy, as if it was a dream. Ji Tianxing, who was dressed in a white robe, walked proudly in the air. He walked through the sea of clouds as if he was walking on flat ground. He finally reached the depths of the Cloud Sea Secret Realm and approached the Green Jade Palace. He was still a few thousand miles away, but he saw a hazy shadow in the depths of the sea of clouds. He quickly sped up and flew over. When he got closer, he saw clearly that it was a huge sacred palace. A 5-colored canopy with a radius of 100 miles enveloped the entire palace. It shone with dazzling divine light. This is the Green Jade Palace? It doesn't look special. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows. With a smile on his lips, he flew towards the Green Jade Palace. Indeed, in the eyes of the various experts of the Great Yan Empire, the Green Jade Palace was sacred and unreachable. However, Ji Tianxing was once a peak godly king and had seen too many cave abodes and palaces of godly king experts. The Green Jade Palace's aura and appearance could only be considered ordinary and not worthy of admiration. When Ji Tianxing was 250 miles away from the palace, he suddenly stopped. His gaze swept across the sea of clouds around the divine palace as a playful smile appeared on his face. This was because there were 50 balls of 5-colored light scattered in the sea of clouds around the palace. Each ball of 5-colored light enveloped some palaces and houses. Many figures of the God clan could be seen clearly. Ji Tianxing knew that those were the 50 factions of the Great Yan Empire. Almost every faction had dozens of Sir God powerhouses and hundreds of elite Heaven God powerhouses. In total, there were more than 20,000 people in the 50 factions. Among these 20,000 elites, there were more than 300 high-level godly lords who were the most powerful. At least more than half of the top experts of the Great Yan Empire are gathered here. If I fly over directly and appear openly, I will most likely be attacked by many factions, right? Ji Tianxing stopped in the sea of clouds and looked at the various factions as he muttered to himself. He knew that the 50 factions had formed an alliance and would not allow anyone to disturb or destroy it. Once an uninvited guest like him appeared, the 50 factions would definitely attack him and kill him on the spot. Moreover, Prince Lien and the people from the Heavenly Union sect were present. They would definitely think of ways to instigate the various factions to attack him. Although Ji Tianxing was strong enough and had many tricks up his sleeve, he was not afraid of being besieged by many forces. However, he did not need to take that risk and waste that time. He could not let Prince Lien's scheme succeed. After thinking for a moment, he decided to use the Armillary Heaven secret technique to enter stealth mode and quietly approach the Green Jade Palace. Swoosh! In the next instant, Ji Tianxing's figure became transparent and quickly disappeared. He became one with heaven and earth, and his divine soul and divine power aura disappeared. In this stealth mode, apart from godly lords, no one could discover his existence. Therefore, he swaggered toward the Green Jade Palace. Along the way, he passed by more than a dozen factions' camps. Even though the camps of those forces were guarded by experts, no one noticed anything amiss. Before long, Ji Tianxing arrived at the gates of the Green Jade Palace. He looked around for a moment and realized that the situation was as he had expected. The several layers of defensive arrays around the Green Jade Palace had been cracked by the combined efforts of many factions. Now, nearly 100 upper-level divine lords were gathered at the gates of the majestic palace, studying intently. Those upper-level divine lords all looked haggard. They had neglected sleep and food to study the defensive arrays and were long exhausted. However, Ji Tianxing discovered that the eyes of every upper-level divine lord were filled with excitement and hope. He raised his eyebrows as a thought flashed across his mind. A long time ago, the 50 factions had been studying the array at the gates of the Green Jade Palace. Seeing how excited and expectant they are, could it be that their exploration is about to succeed and they are about to open the gates of the Green Jade Palace? Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 32:16. Ji Tianxing believed it. There must have been a breakthrough in the exploration work for those higher divine lords to be so excited and expectant. But from the looks of it, the divine formation covering the dark green gates of the divine palace was still in perfect condition. Dozens of higher divine lords were still busy, using all their divine abilities and releasing countless strands of divine power. To verify his conjecture, Ji Tianxing used the Divine Eye secret technique to carefully observe the defensive formation of the divine palace. Everything he saw in his golden eyes changed. The colorful wall of light on the gates of the divine palace was also filled with tens of thousands of veins and lines. They were like the veins of a tree leaf. After a short span of 100 breaths, Ji Tianxing retracted the Divine Eye mystic art and thought to himself, "It's just a low-level king-grade divine array with only 120 million meridians and 360 million nodes. It looks like God King Azure Jade had just reached the God King realm when he built this divine palace and set up this formation." To Ji Tianxing, he had seen at least 80,000 king-level divine formations of this level even if he had not seen 100,000 of them. Even though the defensive formation on the gates of the divine palace had been created by God King Azure Jade himself and had added many variations and ingenious ideas. In this world, there was probably no second person who could set up an identical divine formation. Even though Ji Tianxing was experienced and knowledgeable, he could not possibly use some formation-breaking techniques to break this divine formation. But as the saying went, if one technique was understood, then all techniques would be understood. Ji Tianxing had long grasped the essence of the Tao of formations and was proficient in countless king-level divine formations. Whether it was breaking them or setting them up, he could do it easily. The formation that God King Azure Jade had set up did not appear out of thin air. It still had to follow the basic rules of setting up formations and be modified and perfected on the basis of a king-level divine formation. Ji Tianxing could see that the defensive formation of the Divine Palace's gates was modified based on the 9 heavenly evolutions formation. Naturally, the corresponding method to break it quickly appeared in his mind. He silently calculated. If he used all his strength, he would be able to break it within a day at most. Even if he couldn't completely break it, he could at least create a gap that would allow him to enter and exit freely. Now that he was confident, he thought to himself, the high divine lords of these dozens of powers have already studied it for so long, but they haven't been able to come up with a solution. Within a short period of time, they should not be able to break this grand array. Why don't I go around to the back of the Divine Palace, and while the other forces aren't paying attention, I can secretly break the Divine Palace's several major formations. At that time, I will enter the Divine Palace before they can break the array formation of the Divine Palace's gate. Ji Tianxing felt that this idea was feasible, so he prepared to leave quietly and go around to the back of the Divine Palace. But at this moment, the 5-colored wall of light on the dark green gate of the Divine Palace suddenly exploded with dazzling divine light. Swoosh, swish, swish, swish. Like dazzling fireworks, the dazzling divine light dispelled the darkness within a radius of 1,000 kilometers. Powerful divine power fluctuations were also released from the gates of the Divine Palace and spread in all directions. The crowd at the gate of the Divine Palace also burst into cheers of surprise. Haha, great. We've finally succeeded. It wasn't easy. Everyone's efforts for so long have not been in vain. Nothing in this world is difficult for those who set their minds to it. We are proud of ourselves. Green Jade Divine Palace, we're here. Many of the high-ranking divine lords, who were usually highly respected and dignified, were cheering in ecstasy at this moment, laughing maniacally as if they had gone mad. They let loose the excitement in their hearts and were as happy as children. There was no trace of their usual solemnity. Hearing the cheers of the crowd, Ji Tianxing, who was about to turn and leave, hurriedly stopped in his tracks. He turned to look at the gate of the Divine Palace and saw that the 5-colored wall of light was indeed covered in cracks. Then, the huge 5-colored wall of light shattered into thousands of fragments of divine light. Walala, countless fragments of divine light scattered in the sea of clouds. The gate of the Divine Palace, which had lost the protection of the array formation, appeared before everyone's eyes. A few high-ranking divine lords could not wait to grab the bronze door knocker, wanting to push open the gate of the Divine Palace. Even though the bronze gate, which was hundreds of feet tall, was as heavy as a mountain. But those divine lords exerted their strength at the same time and easily shook the bronze gate. Ka-ka-ka. With a dull sound, the bronze gate shook a few times, shaking off the dust as it opened to both sides. A gap appeared between the two gates and was rapidly expanding. Swoosh. When the gap was 3 feet wide, a vast and mighty 5-colored divine power gushed out of the Divine Palace and splashed onto the bodies of the divine lords like a flood. Instantly, the divine lords were energized and their faces glowed. The divine power they had expended was also replenished. Everyone cried out in surprise and shouted excitedly. We've been baptized by the Divine Palace. It's the divine power left behind by Divine King Azure Jade. After I was baptized, my talent seems to have increased significantly, as expected of the palace of an unparalleled divine king. Even if it's just a wisp of divine power, it's our opportunity and good fortune. Hearing the cheers of the crowd, Ji Tianxing smiled. He knew that the divine power was naturally effective to the divine lords. At the very least, it could replenish the divine power they had expended and rejuvenate them. However, it was purely a psychological effect for the Divine Lords to increase their talent with just a wash of divine power. The ecstatic Divine Lords were still pushing the bronze gate with all their might, trying to open it completely. At this moment, a stern and angry shout came from the crowd. Stop. The sound waves were like muffled thunder, causing the surrounding sea of clouds to churn. The high Divine Lords who had been jumping for joy immediately quieted down. The Divine Lords pushing the gate also resentfully retracted their power. Everyone's gaze was focused on a white-haired, burly elder in a purple dragon robe. The elder from the Great Yen Divine clan looked very old, but his body was still tall and imposing. A pair of bell-like eyes flickered with an intimidating and dignified light. Ji Tianxing stared at the old man for a while and recognized his identity. The fifth emperor of the Great Yen Empire, the strongest expert now, Yen Tiangang, known as the Great Yen Patriarch. Ji Tianxing had read many ancient books in the imperial city's library and was very familiar with the situation of the Great Yen Empire. Therefore, it was natural that he could recognize Yen Tiangang. Yen Tiangang's dignified gaze swept across the crowd as he said in a solemn tone, "Although we work together to break the formation of the Divine Palace's gate, we still don't know the rules. But don't forget, we agreed on the rules a long time ago. After the Divine Palace's gate is opened, the various factions must compete and compete. In the end, 100 experts will be chosen to enter the Divine Palace to explore. Before the candidates are chosen, no one is allowed to enter the Divine Palace without permission. Otherwise, they will be killed." Chapter 32:17. Initially, the 100 or so greater Divine Lords under the Divine Palace's doors were excited and spirited. Everyone was wild with joy as they cheered excitedly. They could not wait to charge into the Divine Palace. However, Yen Tiangang's words were like a bucket of cold water that poured over everyone's heads. For a moment, the area under the Divine Palace's doors fell silent. Everyone calmed down. Their excitement quickly subsided, and their emotions calmed down as well. The smiles on everyone's faces gradually faded. That was right. When the 50 factions formed an alliance, they had discussed this matter many times. Every faction wanted to enter the Divine Palace to search for the Azure Jade King's inheritance and treasures. However, this was impossible. There were too many wolves and too little meat. Those who could enter the Azure Jade Palace would always be in the minority. Hence, at that time, the Imperial family and the various top factions made a suggestion. When the Divine Palace's doors were opened, the 50 factions would have a fair and open arena battle. Every faction could send out 8 experts. There would be a total of 400 people in the arena. Only the 100 experts who emerged victorious would be qualified to enter the Azure Jade Palace. Moreover, the 100 experts would be ranked according to their ranking. The expert with the highest ranking would be the first to enter the Azure Jade Palace. The expert with the 100th ranking would be the last to enter the Divine Palace. This plan was very fair. It won the approval of many factions. More than half of the factions objected to it. However, apart from this, no one could come up with a fairer and more just solution. As time passed, the 50 factions could only silently agree to this agreement. Before the Divine Palace's doors were opened, everyone had a tacit understanding. No one would take the initiative to bring it up. However, this day had finally arrived. The 50 factions had to face reality and abide by their original agreement. They would each choose their own experts to participate in the competition. Seeing the many experts remaining silent, their expressions turned solemn and worried. Yen Tiangang's expression was dignified as he said solemnly, "I won't say anything else. The rules are set. If anyone doesn't want to abide by them, leave. Everyone has 2 hours to prepare. After 2 hours, each faction will choose 8 experts to participate in the fair competition. Naturally, it doesn't matter if you don't have 8 experts. Those who want to forfeit are also fine. As for the arena battle, it will be held outside the Divine Palace's doors in the Sea of Clouds within a few hundred miles. In any case, this Sea of Clouds contains a special power, so it's unlikely to be damaged by battle. Yan Tiangang was not only the strongest expert in the Great Yan Empire, but he was also the oldest and most experienced patriarch of the Yan family. He was fully in charge of this grand competition, and no one dared to object. Of course, that was under the condition that he was fair and open, and did not practice favoritism. After Yan Tiangang finished speaking, nearly 100 high divine lords quickly left the divine palace. Everyone returned to their respective camps and urgently discussed countermeasures and selected people to participate in the competition. Everyone understood in their hearts. Only high-level divine lords were qualified to participate in this competition. Only then would they have a chance of entering the top 100. Great Yan's imperial family and the top few sects and clans had more than 10 to 20 higher divine lords. They only needed to pick the 8 strongest among them. However, the weaker forces were troubled by this problem. Some factions did not even have a total of 8 high divine lords. But they were not willing to give up, so they added a few more middle-level divine lords, making a total of 8 people to participate in the battle. There were also some factions that had high divine lords, barely enough for 8 people. However, their strength and cultivation levels were relatively low, so their chances of victory were very slim. In short, many factions were cautious and weighed the pros and cons before making a decision. However, the experts of Great Yan's imperial family and the top sects and clans were calm and composed, as though victory was already in their hands. They had already decided on the candidates for the competition a long time ago. Moreover, they were absolutely confident that they would be able to enter the top 100 and enter the Green Jade Palace. For a time, the atmosphere around the Green Jade Palace became rather complicated and subtle. Some were happy, some were worried. Some were calm and some were worried. Even the weaker factions felt that it was unfair and wronged, but there was nothing they could do. The situation was not in their favor, so they could only swallow their anger and pray for a miracle. Soon enough, an hour passed. The various factions finished their discussions and decided on their candidates. One team after another appeared from the various camps and gathered outside the gates of the Green Jade Palace. The leaders were naturally the participants of the various factions. However, there were hundreds of disciples and elites behind them. These people wanted to be there to watch the competition personally. Ji Tianxing remained invisible, hiding in the dark to observe. In the beginning, he did not understand the situation. When he heard Yan Tiangang's words, he immediately guessed the result. A playful smile appeared on his face. Previously, I was thinking about the 50 factions joining forces to explore the Green Jade Palace. Even if there are treasures and legacies in the palace, there won't be enough to go around. It'll definitely lead to a huge battle. I didn't expect the imperial family and the top sects and clans to be prepared. They're really ruthless. On the surface, this competition seems fair and just. In truth, with the foundations of the dozens of factions, they're not qualified to compete with the top factions at all. In the end, the dozens of factions wasted a decade here. They're just paving the way for others. Ji Tianxing thought to himself, in any case, the 50 factions are going to fight. It won't end anytime soon. He was not in a hurry. He hid at the side and watched the show for a while. An hour later, the members of the 50 factions were all present. Outside the gate of the Divine Palace, in the sea of clouds within a radius of 200 miles, nearly 20,000 people stood in a huge circle. These people were divided into 50 groups. Everyone's eyes were focused on the sea of clouds. Over there, 400 Divine Lord powerhouses were divided into 50 teams, forming a large circle. What was interesting was that among these 400 strong practitioners, 90% were high-level Divine Lords, but there were still over 40 middle-level Divine Lords. Moreover, the imperial family had sent out 8 high Divine Lords, including Yan Tiangang. Logically speaking, as the Yan family's patriarch, Yan Tiangang's status was extraordinary. He only needed to preside over this competition. There was no need for him to participate in it personally. However, he still chose to participate in it personally. He led 7 imperial family experts to fight the various factions. This was because he was the one who was most eager to enter the Green Jade Palace. It had been nearly 10,000 years since he reached the 9th level of the Divine Lord realm. However, he still could not break through. It had been too long. Cultivating in seclusion and his desire to reach the Divine King realm had almost become a torture and a curse. He had lived until now and stayed in the Great Yan Empire because of this belief. As long as there was even the slightest chance to reach the Divine King realm, he would not let it go. For this, he could pay any price. He could even disregard his status, dignity, and face. Even if the experts of the various factions secretly criticized and mocked him, he did not care. Sword piercing the 9 heavens, sword piercing the 9 heavens. Chapter 32:18. The major faction's attention was focused on Yan Tiangang. Many people were secretly discussing and complaining indignantly. Everyone knew Yan Tiangang was the strongest person in the empire. No matter who encountered him, they would only be swept away and crushed. However, Yan Tiangang did not break the rules. Nobody could blame him. The experts from the major factions could only pray that they did not have to face him. Ji Tianxing, who was hiding in the dark, had been observing the people from the He Tian sect. The results were as he had expected. The sect master of the He Tian sect, Yi Wuji, personally led the supreme elder and a few elders to fight the major factions. Among the 8 experts, Ji Tianxing spotted a familiar figure. It was a young man dressed in a black robe with golden dragon patterns. Prince Lien. Although Prince Lien was a member of the Great Yan imperial family in name, he was Yi Wuji's disciple. He was Yi Wuji's last disciple, the first disciple of the He Tian sect. It was understandable that he represented the He Tian sect in the battle. Ji Tianxing secretly observed Prince Lien for a moment. He discovered that Prince Lien's injuries had healed, and his strength had returned to its peak. He could not help but think to himself, ever since he was injured by me, he's been hiding and fleeing. It's been a long time. His injuries should have healed by now. Moreover, he came to the Cloud Sea secret realm more than half a month ago. Yi Wuji will definitely think of a way to help him recover as soon as possible. Ji Tianxing had long expected Prince Lien's injuries to heal. Currently, Prince Lien was by Yi Wuji's side, protected by the experts of the He Tian sect. He was extremely safe. Before Ji Tianxing came to the Cloud Sea secret realm, he had thought of looking for an opportunity to kill Prince Lien. However, it seemed like he did not have the chance to do so at all. 50 factions are gathered here, and Prince Lien is protected by the He Tian sect. If I show myself, I'll be surrounded by many experts. Not only will I not be able to kill Prince Lien, but I'll also be in danger. Forget it, I'll let Prince Lien live for a few more days. I hope he won't be eliminated and can enter the Green Jade Palace. Ji Tianxing made up his mind. He would not make a move for now. He would look for an opportunity to kill Prince Lien in the palace. Shortly after, Yan Tiangang announced the start of the competition. The rules of the grand competition were simple and brutal. The 50 forces drew lots for the first round to determine their opponents. Then, the 2 sides engaged in an 8 versus 8 team battle in the Sea of Clouds. This was mainly to save time. Naturally, Great Yan's imperial family and the few great sects and clans had their own selfish motives as well. Using this method, they could eliminate the weaker forces faster. The battle soon began. The 16 Divine Lord powerhouses of the 2 teams carried out a showdown in the Sea of Clouds. All the powerhouses gave it their all and unleashed their surging divine power. They unleashed their ultimate techniques that could destroy heaven and earth. The dazzling divine light illuminated the Sea of Clouds for thousands of kilometers, illuminating heaven and earth. All kinds of divine spells collided, causing a violent explosion. Not only was there a deafening sound, but there were also violent shockwaves. The shockwaves were like ripples, spreading outwards in circles, shattering the surrounding clouds and mist. However, the situation was exactly as Yan Tiangang had said. Those seemingly soft clouds actually contained a special power that formed a powerful force field. Most of the shockwaves from the dozen powerhouses were neutralized by the invisible force field. The range of the battle was limited to 200 miles. It could not spread any further. Under such circumstances, the 20,000 elites of the 50 forces could watch the battle with peace of mind. There was a great disparity in strength between the two teams fighting. One of the teams was made up of the Baiyuan family's powerhouses. Among the 8 powerhouses, there were 5 7th-level divine lords and 3 8th-level divine lords. The Baiyuan family was a top aristocratic family in the Great Yan Empire. It was also one of the top 10 forces. The other team could only be considered a first-rate force and could not be compared to the Baiyuan family. Among the 8 powerhouses, there was only 1 8th-level divine lord, 4 7th-level divine lords, and 3 middle-level divine lords. The result was obvious. The two sides fought for 15 minutes, and the outcome was decided. The Baiyuan family completely suppressed the other party and heavily injured the 8 powerhouses. Their outcome was rather tragic. Helpless, the 8 powerhouses of the other force could only admit defeat and leave the battlefield. Next, it was the turn of the two teams to fight again. The 16 powerhouses from the two forces engaged in a fierce battle in the Sea of Clouds. This time, the disparity in strength between the two sides was not that great. After all, the foundation of the two forces were evenly matched. Neither was a top sect or aristocratic family. To them, as long as they did not encounter a top 10 sect or aristocratic family, they would be considered very lucky. Both sides had hopes of winning, so they fought with all their might. The 16 powerhouses fought fiercely for an hour before the outcome was finally decided. The powerhouses of the losing side were heavily injured. There were even a few people who fainted from their injuries. And the 8 powerhouses of the winning side also paid a heavy price. Their injuries were very tragic. Such an outcome did not make them happy at all, because they knew that this was only the first round of the grand competition. Winning this round by luck, they still had to go through the second round of the grand competition to be ranked in the top 100 and obtain the qualification to enter the palace. And they were all heavily injured. Even if they forced themselves to participate in the second round of the grand competition, they would only be eliminated. Therefore, they were destined to have no fate with the Green Jade Palace. Thinking of this, the few powerhouses were very helpless and despaired. Ji Tianxing had only watched 2 matches, and he already felt that it was boring. He thought that at this speed, the first round of the grand competition would take at least a day. After a day, half of the 50 powerhouses would be eliminated. The remaining 25 powerhouses, a total of 200 Sir Gods, would enter the second round of the competition. The losers would be eliminated while the winners would enter the top 100 and obtain the qualification to enter the palace. By then, the 100 Sir Gods who won would have to compete for the ranking. In short, it was very troublesome just thinking about it. At this rate, it will take at least 5 to 6 days for the final outcome to be decided. Since you are wasting time like this, don't blame me for being the first to arrive. Ji Tianxing muttered to himself. He decided not to watch the battles and sneaked into the Green Jade Palace first. After all, he had observed the powerhouses of the 50 powerhouses and had a rough idea. He did not need to know which 100 Sir Gods would enter the Green Jade Palace. He only knew that the top 10 sects and aristocratic families could basically enter the palace. As for the other 40 powerhouses, there might only be a dozen lucky ones who could enter the palace to explore. Moreover, after a few days of continuous battles, by then, most of the 100 Sir Gods who had entered the Divine Palace would be covered in injuries and exhaustion. To Ji Tianxing, this was the best news he'd ever heard. By then, no one in the Green Jade Palace would be able to compete with him. Taking advantage of the fact that the grand competition was still in progress and more than a dozen powerhouses were fighting fiercely, Ji Tianxing quietly went around the crowd and headed for the main entrance of the palace. Although there were many Sir Gods at the main entrance of the palace. However, everyone's attention was focused on the battle in the arena. They actually didn't notice Ji Tianxing's infiltration. Chapter 32:19. Swoosh. The formless Ji Tianxing passed through the door gap silently and entered the Green Jade Palace. The gap between the two large doors was merely 3 feet wide, just enough for him to pass through. The main door's defensive array had already been broken and stopped operating. When he crossed over the palace door, the array didn't have any reaction. Hence, the 5 divine monarch experts who were closest to him didn't detect any abnormality. Only 2 ninth-stage realm divine monarchs vaguely sensed something amiss. There seemed to be a weak airflow passing by them. At the same time, there seemed to be a pair of eyes sweeping past them invisibly. These 2 ninth-stage divine monarch experts had cultivated for 10,000 over years. Their ability and foundation were extremely vigorous and their perception was exceptionally powerful. Even so, they didn't discover Ji Tianxing, only feeling a little strange. Puzzled, the 2 of them turned around to look behind them, looking left and right to check the surroundings. But there wasn't any abnormality in the surroundings. The nearby divine monarch experts were all staring intently at the battlefield, observing the battle situation. The great battle not too far away also exploded with deafening loud noises, releasing violent shock waves. In this way, those 2 ninth-stage realm divine monarchs only thought that it was caused by the great battle between the strong practitioners. The 2 of them didn't think too much as they retracted their gazes and attention and continued to watch the battle. The 20,000 over people from the 50 powerhouses were still competing and fighting fiercely outside the main door of the palace, worrying over who could enter the palace. No one would have thought that they had spent close to 10 years and the fruits of their hard work would actually benefit Ji Tianxing. They hadn't entered the Green Jade Palace yet and Ji Tianxing had already beaten them to it, reaping the fruits of victory. Behind the main door of the palace was a green path that was 30 feet wide and paved with divine jade. The path extended to 100 feet away, connecting to a wide public square. On the left side of the public square was a garden and there were mountains, lakes, and forests. But no one had taken care of it for 10,000 years and it had long become decadent. On the right side of the public square was the beast garden where spiritual beasts and mounts were reared. It was also constructed exquisitely. But 10,000 years had passed and there were no more spiritual beasts and mounts inside, so it was completely abandoned. Ji Tianxing followed the Divine Jade Avenue and arrived at the Gray-White Plaza. This plaza was also very extravagant. The ground was paved with precious white jade, and there were many gems and divine jades mixed in. Ji Tianxing could imagine that if the divine lords of the 50 factions were here, they would definitely dig up the ground. He looked around and found that the square was empty. There were no statues or stone tablets. If it were any other god king, they would definitely have thousands of servants in their divine palace. Statues of him would be erected in the plaza and in the main hall to display his majesty, and at the same time for the servants to worship him. God King Azure Jade didn't even make a statue. I wonder if he's shy or low-key. Ji Tianxing's lips curled into a smile as he crossed the square and flew towards the palace on the other side. Facing the square was the main hall of the Green Jade Palace. Under normal circumstances, if there were any important matters that required a meeting, or if there were any important guests, they would be received in the main hall. The main hall of a divine palace was the face of a god king. If it wasn't luxurious or majestic enough, it would be looked down upon by others. Ji Tianxing walked up the 99 steps and arrived in front of the main hall's door. Without a doubt, the 100-feet-tall palace door was also protected by a king-level divine array. Ji Tianxing wasn't surprised at all. After using his God's Eye mystic technique to observe for 30 minutes, he began to cast spells to crack the divine array. This was an elementary king-level divine array, and it wasn't too profound or complicated. Compared to the divine array at the Green Jade Palace's door, this array was much simpler. Of course, it was only simple to Ji Tianxing. To the divine lord experts of the 50 factions, this was still a huge problem. Ji Tianxing discovered that this divine array had many similarities to the array at the Green Jade Palace's door. After all, it was set up by God King Azure Jade, and it contained his unique thoughts and insights. There weren't many differences. Therefore, Ji Tianxing only used 2 hours to crack the divine array at the door. When cracking the divine array, he paid extra attention to it. He didn't destroy the divine array. Instead, he opened a gap in the divine array. Then he went through the gap, pushed open the palace door, and stepped into the main hall. After he entered the main hall, He closed the door and cast spells to close the gap in the divine array. Therefore, the divine array resumed its normal operation and continued to protect the door. In this way, when the experts of the various factions arrived, they wouldn't discover that he had beaten them to it. If the experts wanted to enter the main hall, they would have to rack their brains and spend a lot of time cracking the divine array. The spacious main hall was dimly lit. There were originally hundreds of gemstone lamps on the surrounding walls. There was also a star map inlaid with gemstones on the dome, which emitted light day and night. However, after 10,000 years, the power of the gemstone lamps had been exhausted and all of them had been extinguished. Only the star map on the dome and a dozen gemstones were emitting a faint light. Ji Tianxing strolled around the main hall and looked around calmly. Whether it was the floor of the main hall, the 9 dragon pillars, or the furnishings around the main hall, they were all covered in a layer of dust. However, after brushing away the dust on the surface, Ji Tianxing discovered that these things still looked brand new. Even the throne inlaid with divine jade and gemstones at the head of the hall was as clean as new. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and muttered to himself, "Although the main hall's furnishings are not bad, it's clearly not used much." It's obvious that God King Azure Jade spent most of his time cultivating in seclusion in this palace. This main hall has become a decoration. He barely held any meetings or celebrations, nor did he receive any friends. Or, did he not have any friends after becoming a god king? With this thought in mind, Ji Tianxing's consciousness enveloped the entire main hall. After a careful inspection, he didn't find anything of value and walked to the small door in the left corner. Logically speaking, that small door was the passage that led out of the main hall to God King Azure Jade's residence. The small door was also protected by a divine array. Although it was an elementary monarch divine array, the structure was much simpler. Ji Tianxing only used 45 minutes to crack the array. After pushing open the 10-foot-tall door, a passageway appeared in front of him. Following the pitch-black passageway, he walked 100 steps before entering the courtyard behind the main hall. In the spacious courtyard, the ground was covered in a layer of dust and withered fallen leaves. These fallen leaves were thousands or even tens of thousands of years old. They had long decayed and were reduced to fine powder by a gentle breeze. The courtyard was simple and elegant. A few acres of nursery were cultivated and many flowers and sacred tree were planted. Unfortunately, those flowers and sacred tree had long withered and turned into black dust and dregs. Ji Tianxing sized up his surroundings and used his consciousness to investigate. After confirming that there was nothing unusual in this silent courtyard, he walked towards God King Azure Jade's residence. Chapter 3220. The design of the residence was very elegant and the environment must be very quiet. Divine King Azure Jade's residence was the row of houses in the north of the residence. The houses on the 2 sides were slightly lower while the house in the middle was taller and more exquisite. It had vermilion walls and golden tiles, richly ornamented beams and painted rafters. Even the threshold of the living room was made of superior-grade purple heart jade. The houses on the 2 sides were not sealed with divine arrays. Ji Tianxing released his consciousness to investigate and did not see anything special. They were all ordinary furnishings and some decorations. Of course, ordinary was only to him. To most divine lords, divine items with a long history were still very valuable. Therefore, Ji Tianxing ignored the houses on the 2 sides and walked to the door of the living room. The door was sealed with a divine array. It was still a monarch-level divine array. Ji Tianxing used a little trick and spent an hour to unlock it. He pushed open the door that had been sealed for 10,000 years and stepped on a thin layer of dust on the ground to enter the living room. The living room was 50 feet wide. It was not very big, but it was exquisite and elegant. The furnishings in the living room were simple, but it was a pity that many of the tables, chairs, and decorations had long decayed into dust. On the wall facing the door, there was a painting made of silver threads of stars. In the painting, the divine fire golden threads that were still shining after 10,000 years embroidered a dignified divine clan man. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and produced a breeze to blow away the dust on the painting. Immediately, the painting regained its radiance. The gold and silver colors were dazzling. Even the middle-aged man in the painting became dazzling with divine light and looked extremely sacred, although the painting only showed the side of the man's face. Ji Tianxing vaguely remembered that this was divine King Azure Jade whom he had met back then. The star silver threads and the divine fire golden threads are materials used to refine top monarch-level divine artifacts. They are priceless. Who used these expensive materials to painstakingly embroider the painting of divine King Azure Jade? Ji Tianxing sized up the painting and pondered silently. He was thinking that divine King Azure Jade would not have the leisure to do so. This painting must have been made by someone else. Moreover, the painting was exquisite and exquisite. It must have been made by a meticulous woman. Could she be God King Green Jade's lover? Or is it his sweetheart? Ji Tianxing felt that this was very possible. He waved his hand and shot out a golden light to collect the scroll into his spatial ring. I can't keep this painting. I have to take it with me. If that group of people outside were to get their hands on it, I wonder what kind of bizarre things they would do using divine King Azure Jade's reputation. After putting away the painting, he looked around the living room again. Seeing that there was nothing else in the living room, he walked to the left. To the left of the living room was the study, and to the right of the living room was the bedroom. The study room was decorated in a simple and elegant manner. There was nothing special about it. The tables, chairs, and bookshelves were old, decayed, and covered with dust. There were many books and papers on the desk, but they had long turned to dust. However, a few jade slips were preserved and placed messily on the desk. Ji Tianxing picked up those jade slips and invaded them with his divine sense, reading the contents inside. After reading, he discovered that these jade slips recorded some divine powers and mystic arts, as well as divine King Azure Jade's comprehensions and insights. Those divine powers and mystic arts were all between monarch rank and king rank. To Ji Tianxing, they did not have much attraction. But if other divine lord powerhouses obtained them, they would definitely be wild with joy like they had obtained priceless treasures. The only thing that was still of some value was divine King Azure Jade's insights and insights. Through the contents of the jade slips, Ji Tianxing could determine that divine King Azure Jade had just broken through to the divine king realm not long ago and was pondering over creating his own divine powers and mystic arts. However, divine King Azure Jade's foundation was too shallow, and he did not have a divine king powerhouse to guide him. He could only gather many supreme-grade monarch-rank divine powers and mystic arts, and after mastering them thoroughly, fusing them into the methods and laws of a divine king powerhouse, evolving them into king-rank divine powers. The result could be imagined. From Ji Tianxing's point of view, divine King Azure Jade's insights could not be said to be wrong, but they were rather shallow. Under such circumstances, even if divine King Azure Jade created a few king-rank divine powers and mystic arts, they would not be that brilliant. Ji Tianxing originally thought nothing of those jade slips, but after some thought, he kept them in his interspatial ring. Even if these jade slips are useless to me, I can't leave them for the bunch of divine lords outside. I want to take away all the valuable items and let them rejoice for nothing. With this idea in mind, he left the study and passed through the living room to enter the bedroom. Divine King Azure Jade's bedroom was decorated very simply. There was a dark green jade bed, a soft couch beside it, and a bronze mirror. Other than that, there was nothing else in the bedroom. There was not even a need for bedding or decorations. I reckon he spends most of his time in seclusion in a secret chamber. The bedroom is just a decoration to him. Ji Tianxing muttered to himself as he surveyed the bedroom. Soon, his gaze landed on a corner of the bedroom. The seemingly intact wall was actually sealed by a king-grade divine array. Ji Tianxing took an hour to crack the divine array. Without the concealment and disguise of the divine array, a secret door appeared on the wall. Ji Tianxing's lips curled into a faint smile as he muttered to himself. Under normal circumstances, everyone would open up a passageway to a secret chamber in their bedroom to facilitate seclusion cultivation. I have not obtained anything decent after being in the Divine Palace for so long. With Divine King Azure Jade's personality, his most valuable and precious treasures should be in the secret chamber. When he thought of the possibility that the target of his trip was in the secret chamber, a trace of anticipation welled up in his heart. With a creak, Ji Tianxing pushed open the secret door. A pitch-black passageway indeed appeared in front of him. Ji Tianxing probed with his consciousness and discovered that the passageway was 1,000 feet long. It extended diagonally into the ground. The passageway was narrow and only allowed one person to pass. There was a stone door at the end. Inside the stone door should be the secret chamber where Divine King Azure Jade was in seclusion. Ji Tianxing carried a tinge of anticipation as he passed through the pitch-black passageway and walked towards the underground secret chamber. The deeper he went, the lower the temperature in the passageway. The surroundings were deathly silent. There was only darkness and coldness. Ji Tianxing vaguely felt that something was amiss and could not help but frown. I've only gone a few hundred feet underground. Why is there such an obvious change in temperature? Is there a problem with the divine array on the stone door, or is there some power in the secret chamber? With that thought, he raised his vigilance slightly. Soon he arrived in front of the black stone door. The surroundings were still silent and there was nothing unusual. He executed the divine eye mystic art and focused his gaze on the defensive divine array on the stone door. It was another king-rank divine array personally set up by Divine King Azure Jade. The structure was slightly more complicated. It took Ji Tianxing 4 hours to decipher this divine array. The defensive array of the secret chamber is almost catching up to the divine array at the Divine Palace's entrance. Looks like this secret chamber is very important. He muttered and reached out to push open the black stone door. At the same time, a change occurred. Chapter 32:21. Ji Tianxing only thought that behind the stone door was the secret chamber where God King Azure Jade was in seclusion. Even if the passageway was cold, it could be due to some array formation in the secret chamber that was emitting such power. He was not on guard at all and did not expect that there would be a living creature in the secret chamber. After 10,000 years, there was actually a living creature hidden in the dust-covered Azure Jade Divine Palace that was long devoid of life. Through the gap between the stone doors, Ji Tianxing could clearly see that there was endless darkness behind the stone doors. And behind the stone doors, in the deep darkness, there was a pair of fist-sized scarlet eyes staring straight at him. The oval-shaped scarlet eyes contained an extremely cold intent and shone with violent killing intent. The two pairs of eyes met for a moment. Before Ji Tianxing could get a clear look at the owner of those scarlet eyes, a voice rang out. A pair of pitch-black claws the size of a cattail leaf fan reached out from the gap between the doors. The two claws were furry and had pitch-black, sharp nails that were more than 3 inches long. Each of the claws grabbed onto a stone door and burst forth with immense strength as it pulled viciously to both sides. Crack, 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 crack. Instantly, the black stone door that was 30 feet tall and 20 feet wide opened completely. At the same time, a torrential flood of pitch-black cold air surged out of the darkness and rushed towards Ji Tianxing. The pitch-black air current contained a bone-chilling power that made one's soul tremble. No matter how strong Ji Tianxing was, his life would be in danger if he was swept by the pitch-black torrent. That was because the pitch-black cold air was extremely close to the God King realm. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing had already raised his vigilance. At the critical moment, he made a prompt decision to use the infinite sky of chaos. Swoosh! His body instantly turned transparent and blurry as he fused with the entire Azure Jade Divine Palace and did not feel any force at all. The vast cold black air passed through him without any delay and rushed into the pitch-black passageway. Instantly, the pitch-black passageway that was 1,000 feet long was shattered by the cold black air and collapsed immediately. Even the rubble and mud that had blocked the passage had become dark, cold, and extremely hard. The berserk energy was still unable to be completely neutralized, and it rushed out of the 300 zhang long passageway. The secret door on the wall of Divine King Green Jade's bedroom was blasted away, turning into a pile of rubble. Black qi gushed into the bedroom, turning it into a mess and collapsing half of it. Such a violent impact naturally caused a deafening explosion. Even the ground within a radius of tens of miles was shaking non-stop. Seeing this result, Ji Tianxing furrowed his brows and clicked his tongue inwardly. The secret room's passageway and that secret door are all made of quasi-king grade materials. Other than God King experts, no one can destroy them. How strong was the monster in the dark? He actually destroyed the entire passageway? Just as this thought flashed through his mind, the pair of furry claws once again sprayed out 10 dazzling rays of blood light, which were like sharp blades as they shot towards him. Ji Tianxing was in a transparent and blurry state. He was almost invincible, so of course, he did not dodge. However, the 10 rays of blood light that were like blades slashed through the rubble in the passageway, causing another earth-shattering explosion. Not only was more than half of the blocked passageway cleared, but the already broken walls of the passageway also had a huge hole that was hundreds of feet deep. The passageway had completely collapsed, and countless rubble and dust were stirred up. More than half of the Green Jade Palace was shaking violently from the impact. Muffled rumbling noises came from underground and spread out in all directions. Such an outcome made Ji Tianxing frown, and a look of worry flashed across his eyes. This is bad. This monster has caused such a huge commotion. As long as the group of Sir Gods outside are not deaf, they will definitely hear it. Ji Tianxing could imagine how the Sir Gods of the 50 factions would react when they discovered the commotion in the Green Jade Palace. Reckon that before long, several hundred divine lord powerhouses would swarm over. By then, his whereabouts would definitely be exposed. He might even be attacked by the mysterious monster and the Sir Gods from both sides. He was not worried that his life would be in danger, but he had not achieved his goal of coming to the Green Jade Palace. If his whereabouts were exposed, it would definitely affect his plan. Thinking of this, he did not hesitate to cross the stone door and enter the dark secret chamber. He realized that the mysterious monster could only stay in the dark and could not cross the stone door to leave the secret chamber. However, he still chose to advance and not retreat, because if he retreated, all his efforts would be in vain. Even if it was dangerous, he had to enter the secret chamber to see what the mysterious monster was. At the same time, he had to search the dark secret chamber to see if there was anything he wanted. Swoosh! With a flash of light, Ji Tianxing entered the secret chamber and was swallowed by the darkness. At the same time, he struck out 2 rays of divine power and closed the 2 stone doors that were as heavy as mountains. Bam! After the stone doors closed, the secret chamber was plunged into darkness. The pair of scarlet eyes were obviously stunned for a moment as a look of confusion flashed across them. However, the monster immediately let out an angry and low roar as it crazily waved its sharp claws and attacked Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing remained invisible and ignored the monster's ferocious attacks. He released his divine consciousness to check the situation around him and realized that this was not a secret chamber. Instead, it was a special space surrounded by endless darkness. The pressure in this space was extremely strong. Staying here was like being pressed down by a huge mountain at all times. At the same time, it was bone-chillingly cold as if it could freeze flesh and blood into ice. It made one's consciousness and spirit extremely tired and drowsy, making one feel like falling asleep. Ji Tianxing thought for a moment and immediately guessed the purpose of this space. Isn't this a special space to suppress and seal experts? I didn't expect that godly King Azure Jade's bedroom was not connected to a secret chamber. Instead, such a space is suppressing a godly king-level monster? Thinking of the monster, Ji Tianxing's attention fell on the monster. He saw. It was a pitch-black humanoid monster that was more than 30 feet tall. It looked very similar to the Great Yen Divines. It had a head, 4 limbs, and a torso. There were also 2 pairs of blood-red wings on its back. However, its body was covered in spikes and purple sarcomas. Its body was swollen and hunched, making it look particularly hideous and hideous. Not only did it look like a mutated black ape, but its hands and feet had turned into sharp claws. Even the spine and shoulders on his back had rows of sharp bone spikes protruding from them. Moreover, this monster had a pair of scarlet eyes and a bloody mouth with fangs on its hideous face. No matter how one looked at it, it was a brutal and bloodthirsty beast. However, more than a dozen purple pillars of light extended from the darkness in all directions and bound the black beast like ropes. The purple pillars of light must have been formed by a powerful divine formation combined with the power of this space. The black beast was firmly bound. No matter how it struggled, it could not escape from the darkness. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 3222. Ji Tianxing finally understood. No wonder before he entered the darkness, the monster attacked him with all its might, but it couldn't cross the stone door. Since the monster was suppressed here, and its movements were restricted, he felt more at ease. While he was sizing up the black beast, it had already furiously attacked dozens of times. However, all the attacks it released passed through Ji Tianxing's transparent figure and dissipated into the darkness. No matter how fierce the attack was, it was useless. It couldn't hurt Ji Tianxing at all. So, the black beast also stopped attacking, calming down and sizing up Ji Tianxing. Seeing it no longer attacking, and silently sizing him up, Ji Tianxing was a little surprised. "HM? I thought this monster had lost its mind and went crazy long ago." Although Ji Tianxing was talking to himself, the black ferocious beast clearly understood him. Its body shook, and anger appeared on its face again, its eyes surging with anger and killing intent. Them? You? The monster? A lunatic? The black beast let out a low, hoarse roar, unclear, and constantly pausing. Ji Tianxing froze for a moment, showing an even more surprised expression. He listened carefully for a moment, before he understood the black beast's meaning. Raising his eyebrows, he looked at the black beast with interest and asked, "Generally speaking, mythological beasts have intelligence. It's normal for them to speak the language of the gods. But you're obviously not a mythological beast, more like a ferocious beast. Moreover, you've been sealed here for so long, yet you haven't gone crazy. This monarch really wants to know, what are you?" Damn it. The black beast was enraged again, desperately waving its sharp claws, releasing a world-destroying divine technique, attacking Ji Tianxing. The earth-shattering sharp blades of divine light rained down like a rain of arrows, drowning Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing didn't move, but he wasn't hurt at all. He calmly looked at the black beast, chuckling, "Don't waste your energy, this monarch is invincible." "Impossible." The black beast growled. Its voice was still low and hoarse, but its pronunciation and words were getting clearer and clearer. In this world, there is no such thing as invincible, not even a divine king. Ji Tianxing saw that it was very awake and became more and more interested. He asked, "Seriously, are you a human or a ghost?" "Human." The black beast narrowed its eyes, revealing a look of disdain. It said disdainfully, "I'm a noble. I'm not a lowly human." Ji Tianxing suppressed the anger in his heart and continued to ask, "You actually know about the human race?" The black ferocious beast snorted coldly, disdaining to reply. Ji Tianxing asked again, "You say you are a celestial, but this sovereign has never seen a celestial as ugly as you. You look more like a mutated beast." The black ferocious beast immediately revealed an angry expression. It bared its teeth and its eyes surged with murderous intent. It was incomparably furious. It raised its claws and subconsciously wanted to attack and tear Ji Tianxing to pieces. However, when it saw Ji Tianxing's transparent figure, a look of helplessness flashed in its eyes and it lowered its claws. It glared at Ji Tianxing with resentment and threatened fiercely, "Lowly human brat, what's your relationship with Chao Qingyu? Why are you here?" Originally, it was suppressed in this dark space and spent tens of thousands of years alone. Its mind was greatly damaged and tortured, and it was on the verge of collapse and madness. When it saw Ji Tianxing appear, it had too much anger and murderous intent to vent. It wanted nothing more than to tear Ji Tianxing to pieces. However, after a series of attacks and exchanges, it gradually calmed down. It also chose to tolerate Ji Tianxing's provocations and insults. That was because it still maintained its rationality and wanted to figure out the relationship between Ji Tianxing and Divine King Azure Jade. Chao Qingyu? Ji Tianxing raised his brows and asked, "You're talking about Divine King Azure Jade?" The black ferocious beast did not say anything and only nodded. Ji Tianxing replied, "It can't be considered a deep relationship. We've only met once, a friendship between gentlemen." The black ferocious beast narrowed its eyes and sized him up vigilantly. It asked, "In that case, how did you enter the divine palace and come here? Tell me, did you do something to him? Or do you have other motives?" Seeing its reaction, Ji Tianxing was even more puzzled and asked, "How strange. If I'm not wrong, this space should be set up by Divine King Azure Jade. You being sealed here should also be his doing. Logically speaking, you should hate him. Why do you seem so concerned about him? What does it have to do with you?" The black ferocious beast glared fiercely at Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing was not angry. He only wanted to resolve the doubts in his heart and asked probingly, "Do you remember how many years ago was the last time you saw Chao Qingyu?" This question made the black ferocious beast fall into silence. After pondering for a moment, it said faintly, "I can't remember clearly. It should be very, very long, right? Maybe a few hundred years, or a few thousand years. Anyway, I'm often in a deep sleep. What does this have to do with anything?" Ji Tianxing frowned slightly and vaguely guessed the relationship between the black ferocious beast and Divine King Azure Jade seemed a little complicated and subtle. Therefore, he asked, "You seem to be waiting for him?" The black ferocious beast was silent for a moment before nodding. "Waiting for him for what?" Ji Tianxing asked again. The black ferocious beast continued to be silent and hesitated for a moment before answering, "Waiting for him to come back and save me." "Save you?" Ji Tianxing's brows furrowed even higher, only finding it hard to believe. It was clearly him who sealed you here, making you suffer torment and devastation. How can he possibly save you? The black ferocious beast showed an angry look again and roared, "What the hell do you know?" Ji Tianxing laughed from extreme anger and said, "You monster, why are you angry again? Can't you talk nicely?" The black ferocious beast's breathing was heavy, glaring at him fiercely for a long time before dispelling the anger in its chest. At this time, Ji Tianxing's divine sense probed that there was a hubbub outside the divine palace's gates. Several dozen factions divine lord powerhouses seemed to be making a ruckus, wanting to barge into Azure Jade Divine Palace. He was secretly anxious in his heart and did not waste time anymore, saying very bluntly, "No matter what relationship you have with Divine King Azure Jade, this lord can tell you with certainty. You don't have to wait anymore, he won't come back. Because he has already disappeared for 10,000 years and there is still no news of him to date. Perhaps he has long died in a foreign land." Without waiting for Ji Tianxing to finish speaking, the black ferocious beast was stunned, revealing a look of disbelief. After being stunned for a moment, it completely erupted with rage and roared hysterically, "No! This is impossible! Don't you talk nonsense! He's already a peerless divine king, who can kill him? He swore to me that he will definitely come back to save me. He absolutely won't abandon me. You despicable bastard, don't think of lying to me." This time, the black ferocious beast was too agitated, losing its reason on the spot, falling into a berserk state. It erupted with power without regard for anything, releasing a world-destroying cold death energy, launching a frenzied attack at Ji Tianxing. Book Guest Residence Reading Website. Chapter 32-23. Ji Tianxing could clearly feel it. This time, the black beast was too agitated and it was completely overwhelmed by anger. It had completely lost all sense of reason as it desperately released its powerful divine power and unleashed its most powerful attack. Although Ji Tianxing was in the infinite sky of turbidity state and his body had merged with the Green Jade Palace, he would not be hurt. But this was only temporary. The black beast's attack was too ferocious and its power was too strong. Ji Tianxing had to expend even more energy to maintain the infinite sky of turbidity state. If he did not think of a way to stop the black beast from going berserk, he could at most hold on for a quarter of an hour before he could not maintain the infinite sky of turbidity state. After all, the black beast's power was comparable to a first-degree divine king. Ji Tianxing began to dodge and evade the black beast's ferocious attacks. At the same time, he unleashed his remarkable ability and shot out dozens of divine light pillars to suppress the berserk black beast. But the black beast was darting left and right in the boundless darkness, and it was difficult to catch its figure. Ji Tianxing's sealing divine ability wouldn't be effective for a while. If he wanted to subdue the black beast, it would be difficult to do so without a day's time. At the same time, outside the Green Jade Palace, the battle in the Sea of Clouds suddenly stopped. Although the first round of battle was coming to an end, there were 42 forces who took part in the battle and 21 forces won while the other 21 forces were eliminated. No matter if they lost or won, they had paid a huge price. They were seriously injured and had used up too much energy. Only the top 10 sects and families and the 8 forces who had not taken part in the battle still retained their powers. By right, the battle should continue. By the time the first round of battle ended, 25 forces would have been eliminated. But just as the strong practitioners were in the midst of the battle, someone suddenly sensed that there was an abnormal situation in the Green Jade Palace. The Green Jade Palace, which was supposed to be dead silent, was actually emitting a loud sound. It sounded like a battle between strong practitioners and the explosion of divine powers colliding. There were also vigorous divine powers fluctuations. Instantly, many Surgod experts were filled with shock as they revealed an expression of disbelief. They all released their divine senses, and through the Green Jade Palace's door, they investigated the situation inside. Not long after, another deafening sound came from the depths of the Divine Palace, accompanied by a terrifyingly powerful shockwave. Even more than half of the Green Jade Palace was shaking visibly. Under such circumstances, it was clear that there were experts fighting in the Green Jade Palace. However, after the doors of the Green Jade Palace opened, no one entered. Who was fighting in the Green Jade Palace? Could it be that someone had sneaked in? Or were there other cultivators living in the Green Jade Palace? Over 200 Surgods who had discovered the anomaly had such thoughts and ideas. Everyone revealed shocked and puzzled expressions and began to whisper to each other. Many people cried out in surprise, causing even more people to notice the abnormality. They began to discuss and speculate about this matter. Naturally, the large competition couldn't continue. Everyone's attention was focused on the Green Jade Palace. No one wanted to continue fighting. There were even many divine lords of small factions that began to curse in grief and indignation. Damn it! We are still fighting desperately here, trying to get the qualifications to enter the Divine Palace. I didn't expect that someone would beat us to it. That's right. The rules were agreed upon by everyone. We all abide by the rules. However, some people think that they are powerful and broke the rules. Which bastard is so daring to sneak into the Divine Palace when no one is paying attention? Hasn't everyone figured it out? Forces like us with shallow foundations are just cannon fodder to begin with. They are top sects and family clans. They don't even take us seriously. They can toy with us however they want. Other than those few large sects and family clans, who dares to sneak into the Divine Palace? We have all been treated as fools by them. The so-called fair competition is a complete joke. It's too ironic. Now that things have come to this, what are we still competing for? Everyone, let's go in and find the bastard who sneaked into the Divine Palace first. That's right. They didn't abide by the rules first. Why should we abide by the rules? We have spent 10 years of time and effort to explore the Green Jade Palace. Why can't we enter? In the beginning, only a small number of Surgods were shouting and cursing. Before long, the anger of being bullied and toyed with spread through the crowd. The Divine Lord powerhouses of the dozens of forces were all cursing with righteous indignation. Hundreds of people were shouting in response to the call. This was especially true for the 21 factions that were defeated. According to the rules, they had lost the right to enter the divine palace. However, this was a turning point for them. Naturally, they would not let this matter go and take advantage of the situation to make a big deal out of it. They wanted to enter the divine palace no matter what. Just like that, a commotion broke out outside the divine palace's gates. Although the experts of the dozens of factions did not say who had broken the rules, they were certain that it was the top 10 sects and family clans. Great Yan's imperial family was the most suspicious. Many experts were agitated. They glared at the 10 great sects and family clans. It was as though they were enemies. The 10 great sects and family clans did not expect such an outcome. Even though they did look down on the 40 ordinary powers and had a strong sense of superiority in their hearts. They were the main force in this exploration of the Green Jade Palace. The 40 ordinary factions were destined to be cannon fodder. However, this was only wishful thinking. No expert from any faction dared to sneak into the Green Jade Palace while the others were not paying attention. Even the strongest person present, the patriarch of the Great Yan imperial family, Yan Tiangeng, did not dare to do so. Such a thing would surely incur the wrath of the crowd. Seeing the chaotic situation, the crowd grew more and more agitated. In fact, the experts of many factions led hundreds of disciples and elites to charge at the Green Jade Palace's gates. The mighty crowd surged toward the Divine Palace's gates like a flood. Upon seeing this, the 10 great sects and family clans felt helpless. In the end, Great Yan's patriarch, Yan Tiangeng, stepped forward and maintained order at the critical moment. Everyone calm down. Everyone stop. You're not allowed to barge into the Divine Palace's gates. Otherwise, you'll be killed without mercy. Yan Tiangong's tone was imposing as he roared with killing intent. A terrifying divine might erupted and enveloped the Divine Palace's gates. Everyone fell silent immediately. Although the crowd was agitated, they did not lose their minds. Yan Tiangong's reputation was deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. The crowd was only jeering. Nobody wanted to be the first to stand out. When he saw the crowd had quieted down, Yan Tiangong continued, I can tell you with certainty that no one from the Great Yan imperial family has snuck into the Divine Palace. I also believe that the other 9 great sects and family clans won't be so foolish as to do such a thing. The commotion in the Divine Palace might not be caused by someone sneaking in. Perhaps there's an expert inside. In any case, we have to treat this calmly and investigate the truth before making a decision. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.